is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programmes sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News with you for the next 3 hours. But here's what's on the menu this hour. And yes, it's 1 year on since the announcement of the Rwanda plan. Nobody's been deported at all. Do you have any faith whatsoever that any flights to Rwanda will actually take off? In other news for us today, and we're going big on this one, should we ban the doctors' strikes? New figures that have emerged appear to show excess deaths nearly tripled at the last doctors' strike. Is it costing life? Should it be banned? That's what I want to know. And get a load of this guy as well. Yeah, I bet his parents are proud, don't you? Anyway, you must be joking. The guy who lobbed a load of eggs at King Charles has now been found guilty of a public order offence. Tried to represent himself in court. Didn't go well. In other news as well, do you feel the need to do this much recycling? Councils want you to use 7 different recycling bins. The world's gone mad, if you ask me. Patrick Christys on GB News. Email thick and fast today, please, people. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think you will ever see anyone deported to Rwanda? That's one of the big ones that I want to know from you today. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Oh, yes, and of course, should we ban the doctors' strike? Astonishing rise in excess deaths. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, though, it is, of course, your headlines with Rory.
Thank you, Patrick. The latest from the GB newsroom. The NHS could face more pressure if nurses reject the government's latest pay offer. It could mean a return to picket lines, nurses joining junior doctors who are staging their 4th consecutive day of strikes. The Royal College of Nursing is due to announce the results of a ballot later. Members voted on a 5% pay rise this year, as well as a cash payment for last year. Unison's result is expected over the next few days. Shadow Treasury Minister James Murray says the government has not done enough to avoid industrial action.
Feels like the government hasn't really learnt anything from what's been going on over many months. When you look at the junior doctor dispute and the government's failure to negotiate with them, negotiations are about compromise. when you have the employee representatives setting out what their initial starting point is, I think people know they're not likely to get that. There is going to have to be compromise. That's the necessity of negotiation, is to make sure a compromise happens. But having that compromise, having that deal, is what is so critical about avoiding industrial action going ahead.
Meanwhile, civil servants will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%. The PCS union's General Secretary described it as insulting and completely inadequate. Staff will walk out in May and June across government departments in areas like the Met Office. A mother and father have been found guilty of murdering their baby son on Christmas Day. Stephen Bowden and Shannon Marsden inflicted repeated acts of severe violence on their 10-month-old Finlay. 71 bruises and 57 fractures were found on his body. Finlay had only been placed back in their care for 39 days before he was killed, despite social workers asking for a longer transition period. A child safeguarding review has been launched. The US president has returned to his ancestral roots, arriving in County Mayo. It's the final day of his 4-day trip to Ireland, which former Taoiseach Edna Kenny said was the longest presidential visit ever to the island. President Biden is expected to make a private visit to the Mayo Roscommon Hospice that is dedicated to his son Beau, who died of brain cancer in 2015. A student who threw eggs at the King in York has been found guilty of threatening behaviour. 23-year-old Patrick Thelwell threw at least 5 eggs at the monarch during a visit to York Minster in November last year. The judge sentenced Thelwell to a 12-month community order with 100 hours of unpaid work. He had pleaded not guilty, arguing he acted in self-defence against what he called the violence carried out by the British state. Staying with royal news now, and the King has spoken of his pride in his 2 sons as he observed military cadets at Sandhurst Royal Military Academy this afternoon. It was the monarch's first visit to the parade as King, and during a speech there, he said he stood as a father of 2 alumni of the Academy, mentioning the immense pride the princes would be feeling. The King also praised the UK's role as a leading nation in delivering training, equipment and advice to Ukraine. A US airman suspected of leaking highly classified documents will appear at a court in Massachusetts later today. 21-year-old Jack Teixeira was arrested by the FBI yesterday after allegedly sharing highly sensitive government information which was posted on a social media site. It is the most serious security breach in the US in years. So Keir Starmer reportedly spent nearly £250,000 of public money on travel expenses while he was Director of Public Prosecutions. An article in Declassified has revealed the Labour leader billed over £160,000 for a chauffeur-driven car. That's despite living 4 miles from the CPS office. Well, his successor, Alison Saunders, who served the same 5-year term, had a travel expenses bill less than a third of that amount. The European Space Agency has launched a rocket to Jupiter. The spacecraft was initially meant to take off yesterday to see if Jupiter's moons support life, but was called off due to bad weather. It is the ESA's first attempt to send a probe to orbit another planet's moon. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Patrick.
Yes, happy Friday, everybody. I've got a lot for you today. I'm going to start, actually, with some alarming figures out to show the excess deaths that almost tripled after last month's junior doctor strike. And it could be a big day for medical news because any minute we think we might be getting the result back about whether or not nurses have voted to accept a pay offer. So we're bringing that to you. But you might remember back in March, doctors walked out for 72 hours between the 13th and 15th. And over a 2-week period during and after the strike, the number of excess deaths in England shot up by nearly 170%, which is staggering, really, isn't it? And the news does come on the day that the result of the ballot into the government's pay deal for nurses is due to be announced. As I said, we'll be keeping you bang up to date on that. But it got me thinking, really, didn't it? A lot of people were saying, well, I do support the idea that doctors do deserve, junior doctors do deserve some form of pay rise. They do an incredibly difficult job. But if it leads to patient deaths, are you still on board with it? And now it would appear, anyway, that those excess deaths are, well, they coincide with the time the doctors were off, so make of that what you will. But I'm joined now by GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, let's start with what could actually be happening any minute, really, which is the result of this nurses' ballot. Talk us through what's going on there.
So the Royal College of Nurses, the ballot's been going on for a few weeks now. Closed this morning about 9 o'clock. The announcement is expected at any point this afternoon. Pat Cullen, obviously the head of the RCN, is expected to speak around 6 o'clock. Now, it sounds like it's pretty much neck and neck, but it is quite likely that the members will reject the RCN, the union's recommendation, which was to accept this 5% pay offer for the year that we're now in, plus the one-off payment going back. Both the RCN and Unison recommended members to accept that offer, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they will. And Unison, that result will be coming in the coming days.
Yeah, indeed. Now, we spoke about this at the time that this offer was put to them, and we were saying, weren't we, well, maybe this is the end of it now. Clearly not. What's changed? Because all the mood music until really kind of about last night was that they were probably going to accept it.
Well, yes, and that's what those union bosses wanted, and I guess expected that the members would fall in line. But, of course, the nurses don't go out on strike lightly, and having done this, I suppose the feeling is we're not going to do this again soon, so while we're at it, let's get a decent settlement. Now, although the government are saying inflation is going to be down, also the OBR saying inflation is going to be down to 2.9% by the end of the year, we're not seeing any evidence of it happening yet. It's still above 10%. So people are still feeling their wages being massively squeezed. And, you know, a forecast, that's all very well, but until you can actually see it happening, you know, trusting that inflation is gonna drop like a stone is quite a tough ask, isn't
Absolutely.
it?
Well, look, I wanted to lead in on that because that, as I've said, will be dropping probably at some point during this show, and you will be, no doubt, hot-footing it back into the studio at some point to tell us all about that. But the other big medical story for me today is this, and it's about the junior doctors, and we are coming to the end of the latest round of junior doctor strike action, but they did also stage industrial action between March the 13th and 15th for 72 hours. Now, at the time, there were very, very strong views on this, as there always is with anything medical and strike-related. A lot of people deeply sympathetic to the idea that they're not paid enough, maybe, these doctors, and that they could do with better working conditions. And I understand all of that. The massive caveat to that is if they go on strike, then people die. And people will say, well, they won't die because the quality of care will still be there. They'll manage to plug the gaps in their service. The latest figures show that there were 175,000 cancelled appointments, and the excess deaths recorded in England alone were 3 times higher compared with the 2 weeks prior to that strike, which is staggering. I mean, there's more detail on this as well. Is it reasonable to suggest that by virtue of the junior doctors going on strike, people did die?
Well, those are assumptions that the government will clearly be making and saying, look at what this is happening as a result of the call off these damaging strikes. But, of course, it's very difficult to prove, isn't it? I mean, it certainly seems likely. The figures of the excess deaths are March 11th to 24th. So while those strikes were going on and after them, 3 times higher excess deaths than the 2 weeks before. So certainly conclusions will be drawn. But Matthew Taylor, who's NHS Confederation Chief Executive, is saying, you know, we can't be certain, but clearly there would look like there was a link. I think it's worth saying, though, that the doctor's argument would be that people are dying all the time anyway because they're not able to deliver the standard of care that they should be. And this is part of the reason, OK, it's largely about pay, but part of the reason that they're striking, that they feel that they're not able to do their job properly in the first place. And since the pandemic, there's been quite a high rate of excess deaths over and above what is normal, I guess, because of all the pressures, the backlogs, etc., and people not seeking care.
Yeah, no, indeed. And they are saying that this is still a backlog and an excess death rate that we'd seen throughout 2022, banging on a bit there about the coronavirus crisis and the knock-on effects of all of this. I can't help but wonder whether or not when figures like this are pumped out, people are going to start losing a bit of sympathy for doctors' strikes. 35% pay offer is what they're really after. Whether or not they get that, I mean, they're not getting that, are they? So it doesn't show an end in sight. You then kind of couple that a bit, I think, with the idea that one of their union leaders has been on holiday at the time of the strike, and his own family threw him under the bus. His dad, his uncle summarised what a lot of people will be going through. Bear in mind, at the last strike, around 165,000 appointments were missed. His own uncle came out, Dr. Robert Lawrence, by the way, came out and said, I've got a hernia, I need to get it treated, I can't get it treated, we're all taxpayers. His dad said he didn't realise, I love this quote, by the way, that his son was, quote, red in the bed, which I thought was fantastic. I mean, he's opened the newspapers. He says he was at a wedding. I've never been to a 5-day wedding. I don't know. Any sign of him?
It's abroad, isn't it? Well, he's now apologised, hasn't he? But clearly he's the co-chair of the BMA Junior Doctors Committee. It's a terrible look because, of course, presumably he's on holiday, he'll be getting holiday pay. He's not feeling the effects in his pocket, is he? So that has created some very, very bad headlines. But I mean, I was outside St Thomas's Hospital day before yesterday in the storm, and I was talking to some of the junior doctors, and they feel quite desperate. One of them was telling me that she routinely works 60 to 70 hours a week, that a lot of her friends have gone abroad because they can get more money. And I think the critical fact is, sure, doctors can make a very good living, and once you get past a certain point, you know, you can be on a 6-figure salary, of very, very generous pension schemes. But in the very early years, they're doing huge hours, antisocial hours. They've taken on this monumental student debt, and they're earning, you know, what you'd get in Starbucks to begin with.
OK, look, Catherine, thank you very much. Catherine Forster, GB News' political reporter. Loads of emails coming in on that. So now you've got the detail about the idea that we might be breaking on this show anyway, that nurses are going to strike again or reject a pay offer. We are also, of course, discussing whether or not, in light of these excess death figures that have come out from the last doctor's strike, up massively, tripled, actually, whether or not you now think that doctors, junior doctors, should be banned from striking. Because if it is leading to people actually dying, is that a bridge too far? With respect, it's not really the same, is it, as if teachers go on strike? I know that's very serious. Or train drivers go on strike. There is a key distinction for me here, where doctors go on strike and then people die. That is a very serious consequence. Would the government have a duty to try to stop the strikes? Eric's already been on. Loads of you have, actually, on this. No, you cannot ban strikes by anyone. How would anyone get a pay increase without striking? That's from Eric, and that's kind of the argument against it, isn't it? So there we go. I'm going to be returning to this, but keep that question in mind. But now, right here, today, it is a landmark day, because it's the government's battle to solve the migrant crisis. It is the first anniversary of the UK's famous Rwanda deal, which was supposed to see thousands of migrants sent to the country. And, of course, since then, absolutely no asylum seekers have been put on a plane to Africa. But last June, a late intervention by the European Court for Human Rights blocked a flight carrying a handful of migrants from taking off. And last month, Suella Braverman was in Rwanda, where she inspected accommodation that was supposed to be used to house asylum seekers. She was so impressed by it that she joked that she wanted the name of the interior designer, which is probably not great stuff if you're trying to say this is a deterrent, but there we go. But for all the tough talk from the government, for all of this tough talk, and we're going to get planes off the ground and people to Rwanda, the plan, just like the plan's meant to take the people to Rwanda, has not actually got off the ground. Here's a closer look at some of the details, OK? And I think it's important for a bit of context, this, because we're going to be talking about this a lot today. It is indeed exactly 1 year since Boris Johnson told the House of Commons that he'd secured a deal with Rwanda to send asylum seekers to the country. As part of the agreement, the government would send £120 million to Rwanda. And as I said, as yet, no migrants have been flown out to Africa. To underline the scale of the crisis, a total of 45,755 people crossed the Channel on small boats last year, and the government is preparing for maybe double that this year, and we have not seen any signs of it stopping. So I wanted to know from you if you think that Rwanda will ever work. It clearly hasn't been a deterrent yet, and it clearly hasn't got off the ground. I am joined now by Albert Rwanda, who is a political analyst and is in the Rwandan capital of Kigali. Great to chat to you. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Can I ask, how do the Rwandan people feel about the fact that we actually haven't sent anyone to Rwanda yet?
Well, I would say that it's not that much that we haven't welcomed any migrants yet, but it's the whole circus that is happening in the UK about this whole issue. Because, I mean, Rwanda has been called so many names just because of what we clearly see as an internal political problem in the UK. This said, Rwandan, the mindset is different. For us, we understand that Rwanda wants to be part of a problem that is a global problem, not just for the UK. It's a Western problem. Migration has become such a huge problem. And instead of just being a bystander, Rwanda has also to be a part of the solution, if possible. But you know, it's not that Rwanda is begging to have this thing. We want to be part of the solution. Just one detail. Myself, I was already a refugee when I was a child. Before the independence of Rwanda, I only became Rwandan again 29 years ago. So most of us, we have an experience as refugees.
Okay, all right. Well, look, I think the sound quality is a bit bad. Can I just very quickly try one more with you? I just want to know, are the people of Rwanda laughing a bit at the United Kingdom because we can't get our act together and send anyone to you guys who are ready and willing to help?
I don't think we laugh about it because it's a crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis. And for us, we believe that it's not really a very healthy political game to play with people's lives. So we are very sad about this whole thing, the way it turns out in the UK. We are very sorry, actually, that it turns that way.
All right, Albert.
And again, Rwanda wants just to be part of the solution.
All right, Albert, look, thank you very, very much. Sorry it was short and sweet, but great to chat with you and take care, OK? That's Albert Rwanda there, who is a political analyst. He is in Rwanda for us. So what I managed to glean from that, essentially, I know the audio wasn't particularly great, but what I managed to glean from that was that really Rwanda is ready and waiting. They are there. They were willing participants to be part of what is a global refugee and asylum problem. And, well, we can't get our act together and actually let them be a part of it. So there we go. Now, bad news for Manchester United fans, as Fergie hasn't been invited to the Coronation. No, OK, all right, not that Fergie. I am, of course, talking about Sarah Ferguson. I'm going to take a look at some of her most controversial moments, including a bizarre toe-sucking scandal. Also, find out what happened to the man accused of lobbing eggs at our dear king. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, let's get to a story that GB News broke yesterday. Joe Biden has been accused of snubbing Britain on his trip to Northern Ireland and the Republic. He didn't fly the Union flag on his car when he was in Belfast, but the Irish flag has been on display since he headed south. GB News' Nigel Farage takes up the story.
Let's have a look at how they behave when they're here. Let's go for President Obama in Enniskillen, Northern Ireland, in 2013. So here he was, the American president, and he's flying the American national flag. And yes, for those watching on television, you can see inside the red circle, there is the Union flag, or Union Jack, if you prefer. And then when Joe Biden was president, and he came to Scotland in 2021 for COP26, what flags did he fly on his car on that day? But very easy to see that he flew in Scotland, yes, the American flag, and there it is, the Union flag being flown as well. Tuesday night in Northern Ireland, what did the beast have in terms of flags? And here it is. Here's the evidence we need. There's the American flag, the stars and stripes, and there is a flag with a presidential seal. He willfully and deliberately chose and opted, along with the White House, not to fly the Union flag. Now, staying a member of the Union is perhaps even more controversial in Scotland than it is in some ways, or numerically at least, in Northern Ireland. I believe this to be a deliberate snub.
Well, there we go. That's Nigel Farage there pointing that out. And that story has gone far and wide. We, of course, did start it here on GB News. To discuss this further, I'm joined by the Conservative Party MP, Sir John Redwood. Sir John, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Look, let's just start with that, if that's OK. Do you think that was a deliberate snub by Biden? And should we be very, very offended by it?
Well, it was clearly misjudged because a big part of his audience was the Unionist community in Northern Ireland. They were unwilling to rejoin Stormont because of the way he had backed the EU over the settlement concerning Northern Ireland. And they were already saying to the media that they felt that Joe Biden was on the side of the Republic of Ireland and the EU and was not independent or neutral when it came to unionism and the United Kingdom. So to choose not to follow the normal procedure of flying the flags of the two countries concerned in the visit will reinforce that feeling amongst the unionist community.
You've been tweeting, Sir John. I'm just going to read one of them out now. President Biden withdrew too abruptly from Afghanistan without even telling the UK, backed EU policy which undermined the Good Friday Agreement, presided over damaging intelligence leaks, lost influence with Saudi, which has put the oil price up. Do you think he's thoroughly incompetent as well as hating the United Kingdom?
Well, I think those are 4 unfortunate examples where United States policy has gone awry, and we desperately want the United States to succeed and do well. They are our main ally, the world's strongest military power, and we normally agree with a lot of what they're doing with the promotion of democracy and freedom worldwide. But I think there have been some very dangerous wobbles in the last couple of years with President Biden. I think the hasty retreat from Afghanistan proved to be very damaging and costly, allowing the Taliban back in with all the awful consequences that followed and exposed ours and other allied troops to great difficulties in scrambling home. And we've now seen that in the case of the very difficult settlement between the EU, the UK, Northern Ireland and the Republic, the US was not prepared to intervene in a balanced way, and we've ended up with an agreement which unionists find completely unacceptable.
Do you think that there's something slightly ironic about the fact that a lot of people in this country didn't like former President Trump? In fact, I seem to remember a blimp of him wearing a nappy being hoisted above our capital city whilst he was in the country. And yet those same people were cheering for Joe Biden, who beat Trump at the last election, and actually Joe Biden's terrible for Britain.
Well, I think it's certainly right that Joe Biden's policies in some respects have been damaging to us and the Western alliance. Now, I respect the normal conventions. The United States will choose who is going to be its president, and it's our job to work with whoever they choose. And I'm not on the side of the Republicans or the Democrats. I'm on the side of the United Kingdom, and I try to assess the impact of policy, whether it be Democrat or Republican, upon our interests. And at the moment, we have a Democrat president, and he has, in the ways I've just identified, made life considerably more difficult for the United Kingdom as a leading ally and a friend of democracy.
I just wonder whether the problem runs a bit deeper, Sir John. I mean, look, I've gone on record before, and I don't mind going on record saying this again, which is that I find it very difficult to believe that Joe Biden has his complete grip of control over America. I find that very, very hard to believe that there aren't a cabal of people behind the scenes who are, frankly, having to run the country a lot of the time on his behalf. And if that is the case, it just makes me wonder who is making these decisions. And actually, is it worse for Britain than just having Joe Biden, who might have his views about Ireland and Northern Ireland, if there are actually people behind the scenes there who, for whatever reason, have decided that they really don't like us? But, John, thank you very much. Great to chat to you, as always.
Well, I think we should respect who the Americans choose as their president and accept that he makes the decisions. And if he has delegated those decisions, they are still made in his name.
Fair enough, fair enough. Look, Sir John, thank you very much. Sir John Redwood, the Conservative Party MP. Right, I've got some breaking news for you. 2 serving Metropolitan Police officers have been dismissed over discriminatory messages they sent to colleagues in a WhatsApp group, including some about Katie Price's disabled son. So that's the breaking news for you now, that 2 serving Metropolitan Police officers have been dismissed over discriminatory messages they sent to colleagues in a WhatsApp group, including some about Katie Price's disabled son. So there we go. Now, loads more to come between now and 4 o'clock. King Charles has been out and about today, but find out which high-profile figure has not been invited to next month's Coronation. And Keir Starmer has been criticised for what he got up to when he was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service. But first, it's your latest headlines with Rory.
Thank you, Patrick. The latest from the GB newsroom. Nurses could join junior doctors striking over pay if they have rejected the government's latest offer. The Royal College of Nursing is due to announce the results of a ballot later. Union members voted on a 5% pay rise this year, as well as a cash payment for last year. Unison's result is expected over the next few days. A student who threw eggs at the King in York has been found guilty of threatening behaviour. 23-year-old Patrick Thelwell threw at least 5 eggs at the monarch during a visit to York Minster in November last year. The judge sentenced Thelwell to a 12-month community order with 100 hours of unpaid work. He has pleaded not guilty, arguing he acted in self-defence against what he called the violence carried out by the British state. A mother and father have been found guilty of the murder of their baby son on Christmas Day. Stephen Bowden and Shannon Marsden inflicted repeated acts of severe violence on their 10-month-old boy Finlay. 71 bruises and 57 fractures were found on his body. Finlay had only been placed back in their care for 39 days before he was killed. That's despite social workers asking for a longer transition period. The US president has returned to his ancestral roots, arriving in County Mayo. It's the final day of his 4-day trip to Ireland, which former Taoiseach Enda Kenny said was the longest presidential visit ever to the island. President Biden is expected to make a private visit to the Mayo Roscommon Hospice that is dedicated to his son Beau, who died of brain cancer in 2015. TV, online, DAB+, radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
All right, let's take a quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2437 and €1.1303. The price of gold is £1,615 and 12 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100, that's sitting at 7,884 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
OK, welcome back. After a dramatic week for the royal family, King Charles was on safer ground today. He's been at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst to review officer cadets, and it comes a couple of days since it was confirmed that Prince Harry will attend his father's coronation. But Meghan won't be joining him. At least Meghan could have been there on May the 6th. It's emerged that Prince Andrew's former wife, Sarah Ferguson, hasn't even been invited. That's according to reports. That's what I want to talk about now. As well as that numpty who just got done for egging the king. But there we go. With me now is GB News' royal reporter, Cameron Walker. Cameron, thank you very much. Shall we start with Sarah Ferguson? So, reportedly, she's not even been invited. That's a shock, isn't it?
Yeah, so according to a number of sources that reported in the papers and other channels, Sarah Ferguson has not been invited to the coronation itself, even though there is at least one spare seat, because Meghan, who was invited, is not going to be going. However, from my understanding, according to the papers this morning, Sarah Ferguson has been invited to the private event, family event at Buckingham Palace post-coronation, which is kind of surprising because Sarah Ferguson at the moment is on this kind of publicity drive for the new novel she has written. Yes. And in every media appearance or interview, in big contrast to Harry and Meghan over their media appearances over the last few months, she has sung the praises of the King and Queen Consort on a number of occasions. She has known them very well since she was a child, really. She was in royal circles before she married the Duke of York. Yeah. They're now divorced. But I think there's a difference here between public life of Sarah Ferguson and the private life of Sarah Ferguson.
Well, it's interesting that you should raise that. We've got a little bit of a fact file, actually, on some of Sarah Ferguson's standout moments. So we can have a quick look at Fergie's life. This is your life, as it were. So it's fair to say she's a colourful character. She married Prince Andrew in 1986 in a wedding that was watched by an estimated 500 million people around the world. They separated not that long after, did they? 1992. And later that year, she was photographed having her toes sucked by American businessman John Bryan in images that you cannot get out of your retina. In 2010, she was caught up in a scandal after offering an undercover reporter access to Andrew in return for £500,000. And then in 2012, Turkey issued an international arrest warrant after Fergie filmed a TV documentary in the country a few years earlier. So it's a checkered past. It's a checkered past. Do you think that King Charles has let that go, or clearly not? No invite?
Well, it's interesting because when Prince Philip was alive, Fergie was reportedly banned from both Sandringham and Balmoral because he did not really want to be in the same room as him. As for King Charles, clearly a different generation. I think the King in the last month or so seems to be in a pretty forgiving mood for various members of his family. So I think privately, as a family, they are very much united, but clearly there is a public front the monarchy needs to put on, and especially for the coronation, one of the most important days of the King's life. So perhaps it was thought it would be unwise for Fergie to be on the invite list.
Yes, well, there we go. We'll bring you more on that as we get it. There has been another story, though, in town, hasn't there? And that is that, well, a rather colourful character. Again, it's full of colourful characters, this, but I'm just going to call him the numpty. This guy threw eggs at our king, and he has now been found guilty in court?
Yeah, I mean, I was there, Patrick. I saw the eggs being chucked at the king.
Look, stop the press. Talk me through that. Remind me what that was like. So where were you? What was going on?
So it was in York at Micklegate Bar, which is this ancient medieval tower, the old city walls, and the King and Queen Consort got out of their car and they were going to meet the dignitaries who had assembled, and then there was a planned walkabout for them to greet the crowds, as they do on a number of occasions. So when the king got to the dignitaries, the eggs started being hurled at him. His close protection officer very quickly put himself between the king and the eggs and ushered the king away. So all 5 of the eggs missed. There were plainclothes police officers, the court heard today, in the crowd who grabbed this guy who is called Patrick Thelwell. He's 23 years old, ex-Extinction Rebellion, and he was hurling, like he was yelling at the same time. He said, this country was built on the blood of slaves, I heard him say, and things like that. And then clearly the police arrested him at the scene. He pleaded not guilty in January. You can see the pictures there of this incident. He pleaded not guilty. The trial was today, and he represented himself in his defence, and he said it was, well, his lawyer said basically it was lawful violence because he basically violence carried out against the violence carried out by the British state, as he sees it, in terms of the historical slave trade, and he's just basically being quite anti-establishment. But he did speak outside of court in the last hour or so. I believe we've got a clip.
Yeah, we do.
Actions like scared people, then maybe hopefully they inspired them to actually have a think about what's really scary in society, which is that we're sleepwalking into a fascist state, and if we don't do something about it, they're going to start locking us up in camps and killing us. That's kind of the point, so I should probably leave it there.
Just forgive me for questioning whether or not that man is entirely locked into reality.
So, if you looked at the optics of the court case today, first of all, when he arrived in court, he had a number of his friends, his supporters with him. They were holding signs up, placards. He was very happy to speak to the media outside the court to start with, where he was airing his cause. Clearly there was a lot of cameras there because it was the first time eggs had been hurled at the king back in November. And then following the court case, he obviously was outside of the court. He was sentenced to a 12-month community order, 100 hours of unpaid work, ordered to pay £600 of court costs and £114 surcharge at the rate of £5 a week. But he continued to his cause, talking about climate change, alleging fascism, and, you know, saying a lot of these things, which clearly he was using it, I think, perhaps as a bit of a publicity stunt to get his point across. But I have also found out from researching him on various social media platforms that he actually appears to be crowdfunding to pay his court costs.
How's he doing?
He's raised £502 so far. I have to point out that he did set up this fundraising page and ask people to support his costs ahead of his sentencing today. Right. So he was expecting potentially a £5,000 fine. That did not happen. He was only having to pay court costs, but I think the point still stands that he is basically asking for public donations. The PA, the Press Association, are also reporting that he has stopped his studies at the University of York. He is a student at the University of York.
Sad loss to the academic community and indeed the wider world, because of course it won't just be the court costs that the public are now paying for him. It will presumably be various different benefits going forward as he finds himself unable to get a job. Cameron, thank you very much. Cameron Walker there, our royal reporter. Now, OK, if you were worried that you might need 7 recycling bins outside your house, and I believe you me, it was giving me sleepless nights, I might have some good news for you. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, a report claims Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer billed taxpayers for almost £250,000 in travel costs while he was the Director of Public Prosecutions. According to reports, Starmer claimed almost 3 times as much as his successor, Alison Saunders, including, get a load of this, first-class flights and a chauffeur-driven car, charging you, the taxpayer, a whopping £161,273 for the car and driver, even though he lived a few miles from the office. Yeah. Joining me now is GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, thank you very much. Hey, look, this is a terrible look for Sir Keir Starmer here. It looks like he's taking the public for a ride.
Well, it's certainly embarrassing for him, coming so hard on the heels of that controversial attack on Rishi Sunak over not jailing child abusers. I don't think it's exactly the biggest scandal on earth, because obviously all this happened quite some time ago when he was doing a completely different job. And the reason given at the time was, as DPP, he couldn't really travel on the tube carrying confidential papers or making sensitive phone calls. But having said that when he was first exposed by the Telegraph for using the chauffeur-driven car back in 2010, he very quickly gave it up. So obviously he realised it wasn't the best use of taxpayers' money.
Well, hang on a minute. That implies to me that he only gave it up when he was found out. So he would have been perfectly happy to have rinsed the taxpayer dry. I mean, this can't be a man who seriously is in touch with the common man or woman or cares about a cost of living crisis.
Well, I mean, at least he gave it up. You're absolutely right. He only gave it up after we all got to know about it. And obviously that the car came with a job. I'm not defending this because I think that it is an outrageous use of public money to be spending quite so much on a chauffeur-driven car. And of course, the other problem that Keir Starmer has got is by not withdrawing the attack on Rishi Sunak, he's rather sort of relinquished the moral high ground anyway. So Keir Starmer can't even claim this all happened before he was an MP, not hard on the heels of using child abuse figures when Rishi Sunak wasn't even an MP.
Yeah, indeed. And I just wonder whether or not the British public would find it bizarre, especially your traditional Labour voters, because this is the kind of behaviour that people might expect from Tory peers. But actually, when you add it all up, is Keir Starmer just a part of this squishy metropolitan elite that is perfectly comfortable flying business class on the taxpayer's dime?
Well, I'm not sure that it's the car. I think is more a question rather than flying business class.
Sorry, can I just interrupt there just quickly, Nigel? Sorry about this, but I've got to be honest with you. For me, flying business class is the absolute complete extreme on this. I have never flown business class in my life. I've always looked at tickets and thought, goodness me, why would anyone pay for that? And then it turns out that in Keir Starmer's case, it was the taxpayer paying for it. I think for most normal people out there, the business class stuff is probably worse than getting a car.
Oh, OK. All right. Well, we obviously differ on that one, Patrick. But I mean, we're going back to 2008. I just think the times were different. I mean, it's quite clear that the Crown Prosecution Service did start looking at their costs. The mere fact that Keir Starmer's successor, Alison Saunders, was able to actually spend 2/3 less than he did. So it was a different climate. But certainly nowadays, you wouldn't actually expect that to happen.
OK, all right. So do you think Keir Starmer will, apologise for this maybe? I mean, will he be urging his own MPs to try to do what they can in the wake of the cost of living crisis to keep MPs' costs down? They can just point at him now, can't they, Keir, and go, did you enjoy that chauffeur-driven car just a few miles down the road? Was it £250,000, was it, Sir Keir, that you cost the taxpayer? It's bizarre, really, I think, to have a man there who's so keen to take the moral high ground, who is as willing as he is, apparently anyway, to take the taxpayers' money like that. When he was on a decent wage, he didn't need to, did he?
Well, I mean, he was on £200,000 a year as DPP, and certainly that was a decent wage. I think the point I'm making is that clearly the car and the flights went with the job. But no, I'm not defending that. When it comes down to what MPs spend or government waste, I think there's a slightly different situation. The Tories have certainly been wasting an awful lot of money on entertainment and their own kind of lavish travel. So it's fair enough to point that out. But you know, it is a different thing. This was a different job when he wasn't an MP, wasn't the leader of the opposition. He's entitled to criticise the government. Now he is the leader of the opposition.
Oh, good stuff, Nigel. Thank you very much. Nigel Nelson there, who's GB News' senior political commentator. It is fascinating stuff because I get what Nigel's saying there about the idea that, well, it was a different time and the car and the flights came with the job. But did it have to be that car and did it have to be those flights? Did it have to be that expensive? Look, maybe I'm out of touch here. Maybe everyone's watching this now and thinking, yeah, fine, of course he needed a car to take him a few miles to work and that the £250,000 that he's billed the taxpayer is absolutely fine. Of course he had to fly business class around the world. Of course that will have to happen. Got to be honest with you, though. I don't agree with it, but there we go. Now, plans for a new recycling strategy in England have been delayed until after the local elections. The government's aim, this is, by the way, more interesting than it sounds, aim to provide 7 bins for every household, ensuring consistency across the country in what the council collect for recycling. Currently, 6 out of 10 councils collect their recycling waste in one container. So would 7 bins just cause too much of an issue? I am not lying to you. We were apparently on the cusp of having 7 bins per household. What do you even put in all of the individual bins? To shed some more light on this, I am now joined by former Home Office Minister Norman Baker. Norman, thank you very much. What the heck is going on with this bin stuff? I mean, 7 bins to recycle, what, a variety of different things? Presumably the bins are made out of plastic. What's going on?
Well, Patrick, let me just say as an introductory fact that I was one of only 2 ministers to refuse to have a ministerial car and a driver, just to pick up on your last story.
Yes.
But on the bins, I mean, this is a ludicrous idea. I mean, it's April the 1st. There's not enough room for 7 bins outside people's houses. I live in Lewis, where I was council leader many moons ago. We've got a series of Victorian terraced houses in narrow streets. How can you possibly have 7 bins? You'd shut the whole road full of bins. And this is not a sensible policy. Of course we want to recycle more, but there's no indication that you cannot recycle more as a consequence of having 1 bin and having it separated when it's taken away. You could even invent a bin, could you not, if you wanted to, with drawers in it, so you can put different things in different bits of the bin. But there's no way you can have 7 bins. I can have 7 lorries from each council as well to go around and collect these bins. And there's a further point, Patrick, which is this. These are local matters. This is a matter for the local council. And the government's got no business trying to impose a nationwide solution on wage collection like this.
But also, what it will inevitably lead to is less collection, because people, especially, I don't want to sound like I'm being ageist here or anything, but I'm just saying people who've put their bins out a certain way for their entire life might find it more difficult to adjust to this new ridiculous 7-bin system. And when people empty the bins and they see the wrong thing in the bin, well, they don't tend to empty them, they don't take them away. So then they're going to fine people, and then they're going to not clear the rubbish up anyway, and they'll block the road, as you've said, and they'll have to incur the additional cost of making these bins and putting them out there and doing collections on different days. I mean, to be honest with you, Norman, it's not difficult to see why so many local councils are tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds in debt, is it?
No, I mean, it's going to cost local councils a fortune if they're obliged to buy all these bins and all these extra lorries to collect waste. And it doesn't make any sense, as I've said, and you've said, indeed, all the objections which apply. And the thing that surprises me, really, Patrick, is how on earth could such a nonsensical, ludicrous policy get past square one on the board? I mean,
Is it not because they're idiots, Norman? Is it not because they are idiots and that a lot of people in local government are not fit to run a bath?
Well, I mean, this is not a local government idea. I think the local government association, the local councils are rather sceptical about this. This has come from somewhere, probably in the Department of Environment. That's probably where the ideas come from, because the government's talking about a nationwide solution, which makes it the same for every council across the country, which is inappropriate, because these are local matters. So I'm afraid it's some sort of couple of civil servants in a smokeless room somewhere come up with this idea.
Yeah, it is just absolutely bonkers, Norman, isn't it? But hopefully there's going to be enough pushback on this to actually pause it and stop it. And, you know, but maybe you unearthed the real solution to this in one of your first answers, actually, which was that, well, they'd be blocking the roads so people wouldn't be able to drive. Maybe with my tinfoil hat on, this would all have been part of some big agenda to get us all out of our cars and get us onto e-scooters or something like that. But, Norman, thank you very much. Oh, by the way, Norman, just very quickly, while I've got you there, this Keir Starmer stuff, right, about him expensing the taxpayer for £250,000 for expenses when he was head of the public prosecutions and flying business class and getting a chauffeur-driven car and all of this stuff. You don't see any justification for that, do you?
No, I don't. And as I said at the beginning, Patrick, I'm one of the two only ministers, Chris Mullen was the other one, to refuse a ministerial car when I became a minister. Can't see the point of it. But in London, you go by bus and by tube. It's very easy. So I've got no sympathy with people who run out bills for the public purse in this way. I would just say, however, to be fair, that Rishi Sunak spent £500,000 in 2 weeks on private jets. So I'm afraid it becomes an endemic problem.
Well, it does. It does. Look, absolutely. Norman, thank you very much. Norman Baker there, who is former Home Office Minister, reacting to the fact that, good news, ladies and gentlemen, you are now very unlikely to have to put your rubbish in 7 different bins for glass, for metal, for cardboard, for food, for household waste, and then also for the green stuff as well. I mean, I've missed a couple out there. Goodness only knows what's in the other ones. Plastic, probably tin. Anyway. Right, there we go. I've got loads coming your way in the next hour of this show. Get your emails coming in as well, gbviews@gbnews.uk. The bin stuff has popped right off. Our local council have stopped collecting our brown garden waste bins due to staffing capacity post-COVID, they say. Yes, people still not being get back to work. Do you know that one of the professions with the highest level of people suffering from long COVID, so who are still off work, do you know what that is? It's the civil service. Yeah, who'd have thought that? Anyway, there we go. Look, I've got loads coming your way, as I've just said. We're going to be returning to that top story, which is it's a year on from Rwanda. Public support remains high, but actually one of the problems is that the public don't actually think it will really ever take off, for want of a better phrase. Have you lost hope with the Rwanda scheme? It is clearly just the idea of it, not a deterrent yet, is it? It is absolutely not a deterrent because people are still coming in their droves. Nearly 46,000 last year and anticipated around 90,000 set to come this year. So just the idea of being sent to Rwanda has not been enough. Do you think that it will ever actually work? And another one as well that we're going in with in just a few minutes' time is excess deaths now tripled during the last junior doctors' strike. So what's going to happen this time? Do you think we should ban junior doctors from striking if it means that people, frankly, don't die? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Get those views coming in, ladies and gentlemen. It will be great to hear from you. I will be back in just a tick. Patrick Christys here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith.
Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day.
I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a very good afternoon, everybody. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News. I've got a big hour coming your way. Here's what's on the menu. So it's exactly a year on since the Rwanda plan was announced. Nobody's been deported yet. Do you still have faith that it will actually, for want of a better phrase, take off? In other news, very serious this. The figures are out and the figures are damning. Excess deaths were up nearly triple at the last junior doctors' strike. So what are the figures going to be like this time? Should we ban doctors from striking because it means, frankly, that people die if they do? In other news as well, yes, we are going to be talking about this story. This is a guy who went out on day release, bought a lottery ticket and won the lottery, and his victim's family, who's a rapist, the victim's family were campaigning to make him not receive the winnings or donate it to charity. Do you think that he should be allowed to keep his lottery winnings? And finally, as well, yes, we are apparently at risk of a pongdemic. Get this, the latest insult of the cost of living crisis is that deodorant is now too expensive and people are walking around stinking. Does this affect you or anyone you know? Patrick Christys here on GB News. Get your emails coming in, people. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Any faith in the Rwanda scheme? Any faith at all? And should we ban doctors from striking? Take your pick, frankly. It's all gold today. Now, though, it's your headlines.
Patrick, thanks very much indeed, and good afternoon to you. Our top story on GB News today, the NHS could face more pressure if nurses reject the government's latest pay offer. That could mean a return to picket lines, with nurses joining junior doctors who are staging their 4th consecutive day of strikes. The Royal College of Nursing is due to announce the results of a ballot later. Members voted on a 5% pay rise this year, as well as a cash payment for last year. Unison's result is expected over the next few days. Well, the Shadow Treasury Minister James Murray says the government hasn't done enough to avoid industrial action.
Feels like the government hasn't really learnt anything from what's been going on over many months. When you look at the junior doctor dispute and the government's failure to negotiate with them, negotiations are about compromise. When you have the employee representatives setting out what their initial starting point is, I think people know they're not likely to get that. There is going to have to be compromise. That's the necessity of negotiation is to make sure a compromise happens. But having that compromise, having that deal, is what is so critical about avoiding industrial action going ahead.
Meanwhile, civil servants will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%. The PCS union's General Secretary describing it as insulting and completely inadequate. Staff will walk out in May and June across government departments and in areas such as the Met Office. A mother and a father have been found guilty of murdering their baby son on Christmas Day. Stephen Bowden and Shannon Marsden inflicted repeated acts of severe violence on their 10-month-old baby Finley. 71 bruises and 57 fractures were found on his body. Finley had only been placed back in their care for 39 days before he was killed, despite social workers asking for a longer transition period. A child safeguarding review has now been launched. 2 serving Met police officers have been dismissed over discriminatory messages they sent to colleagues in a WhatsApp group, including some about Katie Price's disabled son, Harvey. A gross misconduct hearing also found that another 6 former officers would have been dismissed without notice if they'd still been serving. Speaking on behalf of the force, Commander John Saville apologised to Mr and Mrs Price, saying he was repulsed and ashamed. Now, a student who threw eggs at His Majesty the King has been found guilty of threatening behaviour. 23-year-old Patrick Thelwell threw at least 5 eggs at the monarch during a visit to York Minster in November last year. He pleaded not guilty, arguing he acted in self-defence against what he called the violence carried out by the British state. The judge sentenced Thelwell to a 12-month community order with 100 hours of unpaid work to do. Meanwhile, the King has been speaking of the pride he has in his 2 sons as he observed military cadets at Sandhurst Royal Military Academy this afternoon. It was the monarch's first visit to the parade as King. During a speech, he said he stood as a father of 2 alumni of the academy, mentioning the immense pride the princes would be feeling. The King also praised the UK's role as a leading nation in delivering training, equipment and advice to Ukraine. Now, the US President has returned to his ancestral Irish roots, arriving in County Mayo. It's the final day of his 4-day trip to Ireland, which former Taoiseach Enda Kenny said was the longest presidential visit ever to the island. President Biden is expected to make a private visit to the Mayo Roscommon Hospice that is dedicated to his son Beau, who died of brain cancer in 2015. And a US airman suspected of leaking highly classified documents will appear at a court in Massachusetts in the United States later. 21-year-old Jack Teixeira was arrested by the FBI yesterday after allegedly sharing highly sensitive government information, which was later posted on a social media site. It's the most serious security breach in the US in years. A European rocket is on its way to Jupiter, 4.1 billion miles away. Why? To explore whether it supports life. It's going to take more than 8 years for the 6-ton spacecraft, called JUICE, to get there. It'll then spend around 3 years using instruments to investigate whether the planet's 3 moons can support life in its oceans in a £14 billion mission. If all goes well, JUICE should reach Jupiter by July 2031. And back here on Earth, racegoers have braved downpours today to attend Aintree's Ladies' Day. The second day of the Randox Grand National Festival saw punters don their finest clothes, despite the introduction of a more relaxed dress code. But umbrellas were the accessory of the day. The rain started as the gates were opened at the Merseyside racecourse and continued throughout the day, but it failed to dampen the spirits. You with GB News. I'm back in half an hour. See you then.
OK, welcome back, everybody. Some big breaking news straight off the bat here. I'm going to throw straight away to our political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, what's going on?
So, no news from the RCN, but we're expecting that next hour. But just broken that Unison Health Workers Union, they have voted to accept the pay offer. 74% voting to accept and only 26 voting to reject. So that was, you know, we didn't know which way that was going to go, but good news, obviously, in terms of people working for Unison are willing to accept the offer, and the RCN, well, let's see which way it goes.
OK.
We should know shortly.
And just, can you remind people exactly what the offer was, please?
I haven't got the details to hand, I'm afraid. It's just broken. 5% plus a cash payment, I believe it was. So there we go. So 5% plus a cash payment is my understanding of what this pay offer is. And so the Unison Union have voted to accept it. Yeah,
and
overwhelmingly.
And we're expecting that the Royal College of Nursing will come back within about an hour.
Within the next hour or so, yes. I mean, we didn't actually expect Unison to come back so quickly, but they have. So let's see if it'll be more good news for the government and for, well, patients.
Well, there we go. We'll keep you updated. Look, Catherine, thank you very, very much. Catherine Forster there, our political reporter. There's a lot of medical news going around today, so we will, of course, be dipping back into that throughout the course of the show. But let's get to this landmark day now in the government's battle to solve the migrant crisis. It's the first anniversary of the UK's famous Rwanda deal, which was supposed to see thousands of migrants sent to the country. And, of course, since then, absolutely no asylum seekers have been put on a plane to Africa. So last June, a late intervention by the European Court for Human Rights blocked a flight carrying a handful of migrants from taking off right at the last moment. And last month, Suella Braverman was in Rwanda, where she inspected accommodation that was supposed to be used to house asylum seekers. She was so impressed by it that she joked that she wanted the name of the interior designer, which, if you're attempting to try to use sending people to Rwanda as a deterrent, is probably not the best idea, Suella. But there we go. But for all the talk, the tough talk from the government, the plan, just like the planes, have not taken off the ground. Let's get a closer look, shall we, at the details on this, OK? So, it is indeed exactly 1 year since Boris Johnson told the House of Commons that he'd secured a deal with Rwanda to send asylum seekers to the country. As part of the agreement, the government would send £120 million to the Rwandan authorities. And as I just said, no migrants have been flown out to Rwanda. To underline the scale of the crisis, a total of 45,755 people crossed the Channel on small boats last year. And to give you a little bit more context, 3,793 people arrived in the UK on small boats during the first 3 months of 2023 alone. Those are the people that we know about. So clearly, not a deterrent yet. Just the idea of sending people to Rwanda, just the thought that it might be you, has in no way deterred people just about where we are now. Joining me in the studio is former Victorian Liberal MP. It's Tim Smith. And Tim, thank you very much for joining me. I wanted to get you in because we went to Rwanda at the top of the last hour, so we spoke to someone there. What they had to say was basically, look, we are ready and waiting to do our bit. Thank you for the money. It's a mess at your end that's stopping it. But you guys over in Australia, you cracked it, OK? How do you think that the public will be reacting now in this country, seeing that there's no deterrent, no one's taken off, nothing has happened? From an Australian perspective, do you find that weird?
Well, it's weird that foreign judges can stop a legitimate policy of the British government from going ahead. I mean, judges in Strasbourg should not be stopping the British government sending illegal migrants to Rwanda because deterrence works. And we know that from the Australian example. When Labor got into power in Australia in 2007, they rolled back all of the Conservatives' offshore processing. Over the next 6 years, 51,000 illegal migrants turned up. In 2013, when Tony Abbott, the Conservative, got elected, he brought in Operation Sovereign Borders, which was turning back boats when safe to do so and processing people offshore in Papua New Guinea and Nauru. Within 6 months, the boats stopped entirely. And when Labor was elected last year, they did not change that policy at all. The Australian Labor Party support offshore processing for illegal migrants.
You know what, that is really fascinating, because there's two elements to that. There's turning back the boats and there's offshore processing. And I have long said, and I stand by this, that if we did start turning boats back, there would be an initial kerfuffle. But once the boats stopped coming, and once that was a deterrent, if Labour do win the next general election, I tell you what, they would not reverse that policy. And the evidence for that is what's happened in Australia.
You've got to smash the people smugglers' business model. But more importantly, you've got to send a message that it's actually a privilege, not a right, to live and work in the United Kingdom, as the same in Australia. It's a sovereign country. And as John Howard famously once said, we decide, as in the government, who comes to this country and the manner in which they come. Not the people smugglers, not people just getting on a boat thinking that they can turn up here uninvited. No, coming to Britain is a privilege. And you get in the queue and do it the right way. You don't just get on a boat. And that's what the British people expect, and that's what the British government needs to do. Because if Rishi Sunak wants to win the next election, he's got to turn those boats back. He's got to stop the boats immediately. 45,000 people turning up uninvited illegally every year is unacceptable. Unacceptable in this country. And if they don't get this right, if they don't get the Rwanda deal up and running, then I'm afraid the Tories are going to really struggle at the next election.
It was also a question of public belief. So the latest polling appears to suggest that around just about most people, around 50-50 if I'm being honest, support the Rwanda scheme. But very few people think it will actually work, it will actually take off. How important was it in Australia to get the public on side? Did the public ever really get fully behind it?
The public are completely on side. And in fact, Tony Abbott won an election in 2013 because of it.
Right.
And Labor essentially neutralised this as an election issue in 2016 by agreeing with it.
Yes.
So, yes,
clearly the public
are... Well, because 1,200 people drowned at sea over those years when Labor wound back the former Conservatives' policies. So no one wants to see people drowning at sea.
No.
We know that, I think, 25 people have drowned in the Channel last year. We don't want to see those sort of tragedies. We need a strong deterrent to stop people from making that dangerous journey. And the only way to do that is to say to the people smugglers and just to say to would-be illegal migrants, if you get to England, you're not going to live here. You're going to Rwanda or you're going back to where you came from.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard it straight from the mouth of a chap who has lived it, has been there in Australian politics, saw it all unfold, saw a scheme a little bit like the Rwanda plan that our government has been trying to impose, barely, and saw what the output of that was. And crucially as well, saw that for all the political opposition at the time and for all the kind of faux outrage at the time, once it works, no opposition party would then row back on that and reverse that policy. It just wouldn't happen. So now or never for Rishi Sunak. Thank you very, very much, Tim. Tim Smith there, former Victorian Liberal MP. Look, a reminder of that breaking news that I brought you just a few moments ago. Members of Unison have voted overwhelmingly to accept a pay offer aimed at resolving the long-running nurses' dispute. The union announced that 74% of those who voted backed the deal of a 5% pay rise this year and a cash payment for last year. There were some rumblings that they might hold out and look for a bigger lump sum and a cash payment, not so much about the actual pay offer in terms of the pay rise. But there we go. They have accepted, overwhelmingly, Unison now, those members, 5% pay rise this year and a cash payment for last year. I am joined now by Olivia Princewell, who's an NHS paediatric nurse. Look, Olivia, thank you very much for joining me. I don't know exactly about your situation. So did you have a vote in this? What happened for you?
Yeah, so thank you for having me. I voted with the RCN. Personally, I didn't vote to join and accept the deal, as I don't think it's quite fair, to be honest. But I do understand other people in Unison who voted, to accept that.
OK, right. So we're still awaiting the results of the RCN, potentially in the next hour or so. So we'll bring that to you as and when we get it. So you voted to not accept that deal. So was it just as straightforward for you as you didn't think it was financially good enough? Can I ask, what would you have accepted?
I mean, personally, as soon as I saw the deal, I just thought that it's not good enough. How can I get that they want to give us a one-off payment and also the 5%, increase, but that's not enough. If you compare that to the cost of a living crisis, that's literally nothing. And this is a conversation that, funny enough, I had with some of my colleagues. And I really think the government could do better. I don't think 5% is really all they could offer. I think they could do a bit more.
So you think that they should have done a little bit more with both the percentage pay rise and the one-off payment?
Yeah. I don't think that a one-off payment of 1,655 plus the 3,000 slightly above that they want to give us both for the tax year 2022 to 2023 and for the agenda pertained is enough if you then include the 5%. That's literally nothing if you sum it up and consider the whole economic crisis that the whole country is going through. There should be more that they should be able to do. They've literally had nurses striking for months now.
Can I ask what would... So we know now that Unison have come back and accepted this deal. It sounds like it's pretty close. It's a close-run thing with the RCN from what we can gather so far. So let's just completely hypothetically here, let's just say it's kind of the Brexit result of 52-48%, right, in your favour, and your union therefore votes against these deals. That would put you actually in quite a small minority group of nurses as a whole, nationwide, who haven't voted to accept a deal. If that is the case, do you think morally it's still OK for you to withdraw your labour? I'm looking at excess death figures from the last junior doctors' strike, so not the nurses, but last junior doctors' strike, and excess deaths tripled during that time. I just wonder how you feel about that.
I personally think, although we're going to be a small minority, it's still our choice, right? We are the one that decided to strike for this because we do really believe in the government, in them being able to give us a fair pay, especially for what people have been through during the COVID pandemic, what people are still going through on the ward. I mean, I've seen the situation on the ward is really terrible. If 5% is all they can do in a situation of economic crisis, cost of living being, skyrocketed, then that's quite poor. And it's fine. Even if we're a small minority, that's okay. But the point is, there are still people out there that I'm very sure are still not happy with that.
OK, and can I just ask you a little bit about how you do feel about those excess death figures? Because I think people do have a lot of sympathy for especially nurses, really, actually, I think, in all of these strike actions. But when you do look at the excess death figures and you've got the junior doctors on strike again now, and there was something like 165,000 appointments that had to be cancelled the last time they were on strike. We've seen excess deaths go up by 3 times what they would normally be. I mean, they've got a union leader who's been on holiday as well during these strikes. So he's, as we understand it, been on full pay, whilst ordinary junior doctors and hospital staff will have gone out without pay on strike action there. Do you feel like you're being led down the garden path a bit here by quite militant union leaders?
I really do think it's bad in any case, because someone is going to be losing from this situation. And unfortunately, considering the duties that nurses and doctors have, I don't believe it's our choice to actually allow people to die, right? But the point is, you can't expect important members of the societies that play a functional role to work and literally work for such long hours. I mean, junior doctors work for incredibly long hours. So do nurses in conditions that are absolutely ridiculous. To them come to work and be happy with their job, okay? That's not even safe for the patient. So what we're trying to do here, and I believe that's what everyone is trying to achieve, is come to a situation where there is a sort of agreement between us nurses, the junior doctors, and also the government to feel like when you're going to work, you're safe. I don't believe that if you ask any junior doctor now or any nurse that works, for example, in ICU or any other setting, if they're happy with their pay and, the caseload that they have, they're going to tell you they're happy. Of course they're not. But at the same time, we do understand that, ethically, some people might view it as not being good because we're allowing a lot of people to, die, go to situations that are really not ideal for them. But at the same time, we have lives, okay? We're trying to be fair here for everyone. So I ultimately think it's up to the government.
Could I just ask one very quick one, just to wrap this off with us? You get a decent percentage of your wage goes to your pension, no? And would you be willing to forego some of that for more upfront pay? Because that is the trade-off, I think, for most people, isn't it? Who maybe are paid more upfront, who don't get as anything like the amount of pension that you would get, or certainly that junior doctors would get. People might think you want to have it all.
I don't think we want to have it all. I don't understand why we have to trade. Like, it's like we either take now and give up some later, or we take some later and give up some now. I don't think in other countries, nursing or like working as a junior doctor is so difficult. It's actually not. If you look at America and Australia and other states.
So should we have an American health system then? This is the thing then. Why don't we implement an American health system?
If it's still down to the government to decide. If they believe that, we're not going to put any money forward, you're not going to get anything else, then it's fine. Then it would be such a waste of work to people that founded the NHS, to taxpayers who strongly believe in having a free healthcare system, right? It would be such a waste of opportunity. But if it has to result to this condition, and by the look of it, it is going towards that way, then, absolutely.
All right. Look, I really appreciate your time, and I must say I've learned a lot from this conversation, so thank you very, very much. So that's Olivia Principal there, who is an NHS paediatric nurse. What do you make of that? We're going to go now to GB News' national reporter, Theo Chicomba, who's outside the Department of Health and Social Care. Theo, yeah, big news. So Unison, they have voted to back the pay offer. We're still awaiting for the Royal College of Nursing. What's the latest where you are?
Yes, perhaps there's good news for those inside the department here. Unison members, almost 3/4 of them accepted this pay deal, 74%. So over 288,000 members of staff who are Unison members who work in the NHS. We are still waiting for RCN results, which we're expecting at some point today. But for now, we do have these results which have come in. So this includes ambulance crews, some nurses and other healthcare staff who are Unison members. In terms of the deal they have accepted, it's a deal that includes a permanent 5% pay rise for 2023 and 2024, as well as up to £1,065, and also an extra one lump sum that they'll also be getting. So, of course, this will be good news for those who particularly need to go into the hospitals in the next couple of weeks and months indeed. They will still have some of these staff who are part of this union, but of course we're still wait for the results of the RCN union, which we're expecting at some point this afternoon. It's also worth mentioning what Sarah Gorton, who is the representative from Unison, she said clearly health workers would have wanted more, but this was the best that could be achieved through the negotiation. We know a lot of health workers, as we heard in your previous guest, speaking about some of the challenges they're experiencing at the moment, and of course inflation is one of them.
Absolutely. Theo, thank you very much. Theo Chicomba there, our national reporter outside the Department of Health and Social Care. That breaking news that one of the nurses' unions, Unison, has voted to take the pay offer, 5% plus a one-off payment. We await to hear what the Royal College of Nursing does. We're supposed to get those results for you in the next hour or so. So there we go. Right, moving on. Should a man jailed for rape be allowed to keep the millions of pounds he won on the lottery? I'm just going to read that again. Should a man jailed for rape be allowed to keep the millions of pounds he won on the lottery? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, here's a question for you. Should a man jailed for rape be allowed to keep the millions of pounds he won on the lottery? After a 15-year legal battle, Loreth Hoare is now able to get his hands on a £7 million he won back in 2004 when he bought a ticket while on day release from prison. Hoare spent 30 years in jail for 1 rape, 3 attempted rapes and 2 indecent assaults. The daughter of one of his victims has urged him to give his cash to charity, just as her late mother did with the damages that he was forced to pay her. So, no doubt you will all have strong views on this. GB Views at gbnews.uk. This is a guy who served 30 years for rape and a variety of other different sexually based crimes as well. On day release, bought a lottery ticket, won millions, and now is apparently allowed to keep that money. Joining me now is women's rights activist Patsy Stevenson. Patsy, great to chat to you. Should he keep the money?
I mean, no. I think it's appalling, isn't it? Can you believe someone, like, he's done these crimes and then he's won 7 million. I think, to be honest, there needs to be rules around who can get a lottery ticket in the first place. And I think if you win that amount of money, you just shouldn't be able to have it if you're in prison for those type of offences.
The thing is, it's obvious that it is completely disgusting that this guy is now going to get 7 million quid or however much it is. Anyone can see that. But the problem is, realistically, what do we do about it? I mean, you've just said there that, anyone who goes to buy a lottery ticket, they have to check the sex offenders register, do they? It is a tricky one in that regard, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, I think it's just one of those things that, I mean, he appealed, didn't he? So he appealed to have that money. I don't know why he won that. I don't know who gave that, you can have that 7 million. I don't know who gave that order. I think that's ridiculous.
Do you think, then, that realistically we should live in a world where anyone who's gone to prison for, horrific sexual crimes should, be banned from ever receiving any kind of financial windfall? I mean, where would that stop if they were the son of a multimillionaire, for example? Should they be banned from getting their inheritance?
I think what it is, because a lot of the lotto winning, the lottery comes from taxpayers, doesn't it? Or comes from people that So it depends, where it comes from. There's a lot of context around it, but I think I can't imagine what the victims' families are going through. I think that's appalling to see. It's a random occurrence as well. This isn't an everyday thing that happens. But I really do think there should be some regulation in place where if you have committed severe sex offences, you shouldn't be allowed to win £7 million.
I imagine that there could be a way, or possibly should be a way, of actually saying if you are in prison for a catalogue of different offences, say murder, paedophilia, rape, some of that kind of bracket of offences, then you should be banned from winning the lottery. It is a really tough one. There's a mixed bag on this. I'm just going to put a couple of emails to you if that's all right. Look, Gary's been on. Gary says, if you won it legally, as much as it annoys me, then he's got to keep it. But then here's another one here, and I just want to make sure I get this one right. It is from John, who says he's got to give this to charity. So there's two men who've got in touch on this, but John says he's got to give this money to charity. I know that the victim's family were desperate for him to give it to charity. This guy presumably has a very questionable or no moral compass whatsoever, given the nature of his offences. I mean, do you have any hope at all that he might do the right thing and give this money to a rape survivors charity?
I mean, he's probably not going to, but to be honest, does the charity really want money from him? I think that's, it does feel a bit disgusting. But what I would... that person that was like, oh, he legally won it. Yeah, but he broke the law. So what? We're supposed to uphold the law, but he can just break the law where he likes. It doesn't make any sense.
Patsy, look, thank you very much. Great to chat to you. Patsy Stevenson there, who's a women's rights activist. It's a very strange topic, that, and it jumped out to me this morning because it got me thinking. It really kind of confronted me. I was like, well, this is a guy who's done unspeakable harms to people, served a whopping great big prison sentence, and clearly is pretty repulsive, very repulsive as a man. But then he's walked into a corner shop and bought a lottery ticket and he's won 7 million quid. Do you police that? I don't know. Get your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you think that guy should be allowed to actually keep the money? He has been allowed. So it just feels awful, though, doesn't it? It feels absolutely awful. Look, I've still got loads coming your way between now and 5 o'clock. We will hear from a man... Yes, that's right. The man who's been convicted of throwing 5 eggs at the king. Is he repentant? Not a bit of it. The absolute state of that. And Keir Starmer's being criticised for what he got up to when he was head of the Crown Prosecution Service. Yes, you won't want to miss that. But first, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Well, let's bring you some breaking news that we've heard about in the last half hour. You will have heard it if you were listening to Patrick's show. Unison members have voted to accept a pay offer aimed at resolving the NHS dispute. The union says almost 3/4 of its members back the deal, offering a 5% pay rise this year and a cash payment for last year. The Royal College of Nursing is due to announce results of its ballot later. The government says Unison's decision shows that the fair and reasonable proposal can bring an end to this dispute. A mother and a father have been found guilty of the murder of their baby son on Christmas Day. Stephen Bowden and Shannon Marsden inflicted repeated acts of severe violence on their 10-month-old baby boy, Finlay. 71 bruises and 57 fractures were found on his body. Finlay had only been placed back in their care for 39 days before he was killed, despite social workers asking for a longer transition period. And 2 serving Met police officers have been dismissed over discriminatory messages they sent to colleagues in a WhatsApp group, including some about Katie Price's disabled son, Harvey. A gross misconduct hearing also found that another 6 former officers would have been dismissed without notice if they'd still been serving. Speaking on behalf of the force, Commander John Saville apologised to the Price family, saying he was repulsed and ashamed. The US President has returned to his Irish ancestral roots, arriving in County Mayo. It's the final day of his 4-day trip to Ireland, which the former Taoiseach Enda Kenny said was the longest presidential visit ever to Ireland. President Biden's expected to make a private visit to the Mayo Roscommon Hospice that is dedicated to his son Beau, who died of brain cancer in 2015. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, 23-year-old student Patrick Thelwell has been found guilty of threatening behaviour after attempting to egg the king last November. The judge sentenced Thelwell to a 12-month community order with 100 hours of unpaid work. He also ordered the defendant, who said that he had now given up his studies, to pay £600 court costs and £114 surcharge at a rate of £5 per week. GB News' Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley was in court for this case.
Patrick Thelwell has been found guilty of threatening behaviour after he threw at least 5 eggs in the direction of King Charles during the monarch's visit to York on November the 9th of last year. The judge sentenced Thelwell.
OK. All right, unfortunately, we've lost Anna Riley there, but there we go. Anyway, this guy was actually sentenced after not pleading guilty because he was basically saying, wasn't he, that it was all perfectly justified because of the historic wrongs. I'm just going to recap exactly what he was sentenced to. That was Patrick Thelwell to a 12-month community order with 100 hours of unpaid work. He also ordered the defendant, who said that he had now given up his studies, to pay £600 court costs and £114 surcharge at a rate of £5 a week. Anyway, there we go. So you could say that it's been an interesting week for King Charles, but he was on safer ground today. He's been at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst to review officer cadets. It comes a couple of days since it was confirmed that Prince Harry will attend his father's coronation, but Meghan won't be joining him. At least Meghan could have been there on May the 6th. But it's emerged that Prince Andrew's former wife, Sarah Ferguson, wasn't even invited. Shall we take a little look back? I think we should. I think it'd be rude not to. At Fergie's life. Fergie, this is your life. And it's fair to say that she's been a bit of a colourful character. She married Prince Andrew in 1986 in a wedding that was watched by an estimated 50 million people around the world. But sadly, they separated in 1992. And later that year, she was photographed having her toes sucked by American businessman John Bryan in images that are, let's be honest with you, very hard to forget. In 2010, she was caught up in a scandal after offering an undercover reporter access to Andrew in return for £500,000. And then, in 2012, Turkey issued, I'd forgotten about this one, an international arrest warrant after Fergie filmed a TV documentary in the country a few years earlier. So, there we go. What do you make of that, ladies and gentlemen? Meghan isn't the only one missing out on the coronation. At least that was by choice. Apparently, Fergie will be attending a do later on in the evening, which is a private occasion. So she's getting a more intimate experience, isn't she? But there we are. Right, OK. I'm going to ask you now, ladies and gents, a personal question. Do you smell? No, I'm not being rude. There are fears that lots of Brits have stopped using deodorant, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Look, we've covered quite a lot in this show so far. It's 1 year on from the Rwanda plan being announced. No planes taking off yet. No people deported to Rwanda as of yet. I spoke to a chap who's in Rwanda. He's a political analyst in Kigali. He was saying that Rwanda, as far as they're concerned, has been ready and waiting to take these people, certainly ready and waiting to take the money, which we have given them in a large chunk, and are just quite annoyed that our own internal politics appears to be stopping us from actually sending anyone to Rwanda. I also spoke to a former Australian MP. Australia, we all know, sorted out their illegal migrant problem, didn't they? And he was basically saying, look, if you implement a policy, and a policy that involves smashing the people smugglers business model, i.e. actually towing boats back, then, once it works, whichever party comes in next won't reverse it. And I can't help but wonder whether or not Rishi Sunak should start doing that now. Clearly, just the thought of people being sent to Rwanda is not a deterrent. Why? Because we're scheduled to have yet another record year in the Channel, aren't we? That's showing no signs of stopping at all. So just the notion that you might find yourself waking up in Rwanda one day is not a deterrent for people. If he started turning the boats back, and if, I'm just being hypothetical here, and if the boats then stopped coming, I bet you 50 quid that Labour would not then reverse that policy if they won the next general election. But by far and away, the biggest interaction I've had in my inbox so far today, gbviews at gbnews.uk, was about this kind of morbidly fascinating story we were talking about earlier on. A rapist served 30 years in prison for rape and a variety of other sex offences, went out on day release, bought a lottery ticket, won 7 million quid, and has now been told that he can keep that money. And I was asking you whether or not you think that that's OK. Andrew says, no, I don't think he should get it. But more to the point, who's been holding on to this money? And has it got interest over the last few years? I tell you what, this is a cracking point, this, actually, from Joe, who says, why was a rapist allowed out on day release? And that actually is a good point, isn't it? Why was this guy even given the opportunity to go out and buy a lottery ticket? And then, presumably now, he can spend the rest of his days living in absolute luxury. I think it sticks in the craw, doesn't it, of anyone who is a survivor, anyone who's been a victim of anything like this. People are in prison for breaking the law, says Keith. We wish they obeyed the law. He legally bought a ticket, though, and by legal process, he won. It does great, but the money is his to spend as he pleases. And that's the other side of it, Keith, isn't it? Get your views continuing to come in. But back to politics now, because a report claims that Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer billed taxpayers for almost £250,000 in travel costs whilst he was Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, according to reports, Starmer claimed almost 3 times as much as his successor, Alison Saunders, including first-class flights and a chauffeur-driven car, charging you, the taxpayer, a whopping £161,273 for the car and driver. That's alone, so that's just the car and driver, even though he lived just a few miles away from the office. Joining me now is Media Campaign Manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, is Conor Hollahone. Conor, thank you very much. I've got to be honest with you, I think this is an absolute outrage and potentially exposes Sir Keir Starmer as being somewhat of a champagne socialist. What can the possible justification be for £250,000 being spent on a chauffeur-driven car to an office that you live a few miles away and business-class flights?
Well, thank you for having me on, Patrick. Yeah, I think a lot of us were surprised by these numbers. I think particularly on the fact that Sir Keir Starmer was charging the taxpayer for his own commute to the office. I don't know about you, Patrick, but I pay for my own commute to the office, and I think most people in the public sector should be expected to do so as well. So Yeah, I think this shows, and we've shown across the public sector, it's not just with, Sir Keir Starmer. We've seen it with Rishi Sunak, for instance, billing the taxpayer for £500,000 for a couple of private jet flights over the course of just a week. So it's not just Labour; it's across the public sector. There's a addiction to luxury, and unfortunately, it's the rest of us that are having to pay for it.
Do you think that there is some kind of mental compulsion with people in public sector jobs in general, that if they are told that you can bill the taxpayer for something, they just do it to excess because it's like a faceless, I'm not going to say crime because it's not a crime, although it arguably should be at this rate, but it's like a faceless thing. They don't actually see the person they're taking their money off. They don't realise the grand total of damage financially they are doing to this country by, like Keir Starmer, going, oh, I need to have a chauffeur-driven car because I've got very important documents with me. Buy your own car, lock the doors, drive yourself to work like a normal person.
Well, I think, when you and I go on holiday or we're traveling somewhere, we might look for a good value option, something which is good for the wallet. I think too often in the public sector, because there is that disconnect, people aren't thinking about what represents value or what represents the lowest cost to the taxpayer. They, as we see so often, we revealed back in January that Department for International Trade has spent £600,000 on flights over the course of a couple of months. They were luxury flights. They weren't the value options. They weren't the cheapest options. So yeah, too often in the public sector, the luxury is no expenses spared, and we're the ones picking up the tab.
Yeah, I just think it's absolutely staggering, and I don't see what the possible justification can be, especially business class flights. Look, I don't know about you, Connor. Maybe you have been fortunate enough in your life to hop on and go business class. Is it, what do they say, people who turn left on a plane or something? I think the fact that I'm not even sure of that, it probably sums up where my personal finances have been at for many years, but there we go. For me, that's the ridiculous thing of it. Does he have to go in a business class trip? And then I was looking at what kind of job he was actually doing to warrant that expenditure. His basic salary was 200 grand a year, and then you're racking up £250,000 in expenses as well. I'm sorry, but, I mean, I would have expected at least, certain notorious sex offenders to have been jailed for longer for that.
And I think, like you said at the top of the piece, I think one of the most important things about this to note is that Sir Keir Starmer's predecessor billed the taxpayer for only a third of what he billed the taxpayer. So it's clear that no expense was spared. And I think, should Keir Starmer get into number 10 Downing Street after the next election, let's see if he'll put his money where his mouth is and put an end to these sorts of excesses.
All right, Connor, thank you very much. Connor Holohan there, who is the media campaign manager of the Taxpayers Alliance, reacting to Keir Starmer's expenditure. Thank you very much. Very quick off the draw here from Colin, who's emailed in to say, Patrick, of course Keir Starmer would turn left on the plane, wouldn't he? But there we go. Now, as the price of deodorant soars and many of us are hit by the cost of living crisis, is Britain going through a pong-demic? That's right. Many bestsellers are costing, this is deodorant, are costing £5 for a can, and some shoppers have vowed to go without. But do we even need to wear deodorant? There are massive concerns, I'm telling you, massive concerns, that people are going to walk around just stinking the gaff out. With me now is dating coach Nadia Essex, because, Nadia, I wanted to know, do some women like a little bit of a whiff?
No.
Right. Cheers for coming on, Nadia.
No,
I'll see you next time.
Sorry.
So you don't think you don't?
No, there is nothing nicer than a nice smelling man or woman. I know I've got a 3-year-old, and when I was pregnant, I was on the tube, obviously full of the hormones, and a guy walked past me wearing the most sublime aftershave, and I absolutely, hand on my heart, would have married him in an instant if he'd asked me, because I was captivated by how good he smelled. And actually, a smell in dating can take your number up a whole number. So if you're averaging like an 8, with a good smell, you can go up to a 9. That's how important smell is.
Gosh, I mean, that is staggering. So of all of the impacts of the cost of living crisis now, you think people shouldn't compromise when it comes to deodorant?
No, oh my gosh, I get, like, I read the piece and I was like, okay, I get like the skin microbiome and all that sort of stuff, and we are putting loads of like potions and things on our skin that probably isn't the best for the environment, isn't best for our skin, but ultimately like, BO is a deal breaker. It's one of the number one deal breakers in dating because it's just completely unpleasant, especially when it goes up your nose and it starts burning your nose hairs. That is a deal breaker. So yeah, if you want to be successful in dating, good teeth and deodorant.
Oh, well, there you go. But can I just say, though, do you not think that this maybe affects more of those people who actually are already in a long-term relationship, who stop trying?
Maybe, but like the study, the guys that are doing this as well have all said that they had to give their body time to get used to it. So after the initial, like, pongy period, then they stopped sort of smelling as much. And why would you want to be around someone for a length of time who is just stinking to high heaven? I mean, I've had lots of businesses in my time. I've been managers for lots, and you know, body odor has been a huge thing that you can get called in for, and you have meetings with HR departments because it's that unpleasant and distracting when you're trying to do your work. So yeah, to go through that pongy period, I think if you want to save a couple of quid, you know, maybe cut down on the Starbucks, not the deodorant.
Yeah, look, I'm inclined to agree with you, really. I do think it is just unbelievably unpleasant for people, and I hate it. As summer is fast approaching, I cannot help but already practically right at the back of my throat get the whiff of that person who gets on you at the tube or the train, and, you know, when you're all hanging onto the overhead things and the arm goes up and you just, oh, no, please, no, for the love of God.
Armpit height. Like, that's where I hover around people's arms and boob height. And so I literally get the full brunt of people's, like, really been to the gym or been at work all day armpit. It's very, very, very unpleasant. I carry perfume in my bag, and I do often have to do, like, a slice side spritz.
OK, just very lastly, Nadia, I mean, in Nadia Essex's Britain, do people who stink get banned from public transport or leaving the house?
No, but just give them deodorant. I'll happily spend $1.99 and get down Tesco's and get you a Shaw men's deodorant, and have it on me. I'm happy to provide it.
There you go, Nadia. Thank you very much, Nadia Essex there, who is, of course, a dating coach, reacting to that bombshell report. That now fewer people are buying deodorant, apparently, and we could end up becoming a nation of absolute, complete and utter stinkers because deodorant is getting so expensive. People are saying that it's going up to around £5 a can for the cheapest deodorant. Michelle has been in touch, though, with a very good point, who's just said, Patrick, there's a place called the Pound Shop. And, yeah, Michelle, I think that maybe blows that whole thing out of the water. I've got to be honest with you, throughout the cost of living crisis, I think if I was choosing between heating and eating, which is the shocker, isn't it? I think I'd be inclined to eat. If I was choosing between eating and being so obnoxiously smelly that people don't want to look at me or talk to me or come anywhere near me and everyone's talking about me behind my back, I think I'd be inclined to not eat, which is maybe my solution to losing a bit of weight. Look, loads of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk. And the story that we were touching on earlier is proving to be a massive, massive topic in the inbox, which is about this guy who was released from prison. He was been in prison for 30 years. He was done for rape and a variety of different other sexual-based offences, was allowed out on day release, which is proving controversial in itself, bought a lottery ticket, won £7 million, and has now been allowed to keep the money. The question, by the way, for those of you getting in touch are going, why doesn't he do the decent thing and give it to charity? Well, look who we're dealing with it. OK, so he's not really going to do the right thing, is he? They're saying that, basically, Patrick, he should never have been allowed out on day release. That is the crux of this matter. But, like Gary says that, actually, look, Patrick, he did buy it. He did buy the ticket. It was legal. He was legally out on day release. And the money is his. So there we go. I've got to go into a couple of the other stories now that have come in about Rwanda, because that's what story that I'm going to be going in at the top of the next hour with. It is 1 year on since we announced that we were doing a deal with Rwanda. Last year, around 46,000 people crossed the channel illegally. That is obviously despite us saying that we're going to deport you to Rwanda. No people have been deported to Rwanda, and there is no sign of that happening any time soon. So the latest polling data shows that around 50% of people are in favour of it. So they're not morally opposed to the Rwanda plan. They're not morally opposed to deporting people, but they just don't think it's going to happen. And clearly, given that we've already had nearly 4,000 people already this year across the channel, it would appear, wouldn't it, that they don't think anything's going to happen to them either. I was asking you whether or not you think you'll ever see a plane take off the ground and Paul has been on. Paul says, Patrick, we will not see a flight take off as long as we're in the ETHR. We've got to get out and get out of it now. And Sharon says, Patrick, we are an absolute joke. These people smugglers and the people coming across the channel are all laughing at us. It's funny you should say that, because I get the strong impression that the people in power in Rwanda are actually laughing at us at the moment, because we've given them £120 million to, well, renovate a couple of hotels, essentially, and build a couple of new sites. And as yet, we have not actually sent them a single asylum seeker or refugee. Keep your views coming in throughout the course of this show. I've got an action-packed hour coming your way. We're going to be having a big debate as well, not just on Rwanda, but also when it comes to our NHS, as I just want to tease ahead, we do have some breaking news for you on that, and it involves strike action. I will tell you the best as best I can when I come back. Patrick Christys here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive, because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome along, everybody. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News. It's just about to go 5 p.m, which means I'm with you for the next hour. I've got a huge amount coming your way, so strap yourselves in. And we, of course, start with breaking news. That's right. It has just been announced that the Royal College of Nursing Union, their members have voted to reject the pay offer, so they will be striking from April the 30th for 48 hours from 8 a.m. What do you make of that? That's the big one. Unison, the other union there, of course, did vote to actually accept it. So the Royal College of Nursing, they have said no. In other news, Rwanda, it's exactly 1 year on, isn't it, since we announced the Rwanda plan, and as yet, nobody has been sent to Rwanda, and that has cost us £120 million. The public apparently still just about support the scheme, but actually don't think it'll happen. Where are you on that? I want to know. In other news, yes, Eggman, that's right. This lovely chap here, who I imagine his parents are very proud of him, decided to lob 5 eggs at our king, and he was found guilty of a public order offence at a court today. He did avoid jail, though, so there we go. And finally, as well, bins. Yes, how do you feel about this? Recycling, bit of a nightmare at the best of times. How do you feel about the idea that you might be about to have 7 recycling bins? 7. I am not joking, and I do think they are all going to be made of plastic. All that coming your way, and much more, right here. Yeah, more coming in now on that big breaking news that the RCN union, they have said that their members have voted to reject the pay offer. So nurses will strike there on the 30th of April for 48 hours. I'll bring you more detail on that as and when I get it. Now, though, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story on GB News today, as you've been hearing, nurses will stage another round of strikes from 8 p.m. on April the 30th for 48 hours. RCN nurses rejected the government's offer aimed at resolving the NHS pay dispute. The strikes come after 54% of Royal College of Nursing members voted to reject an offer of 5% pay rise this year and a cash payment for last year. The Royal College of Nursing said the new strike will also involve nursing staff working in emergency departments, intensive care units, cancer care and other services that were previously exempt. Paediatric nurse Olivia Princewell told us she thinks the government could have given a better offer.
I mean, junior doctors work for incredibly long hours. So do nurses in conditions that are absolutely ridiculous. To then come to work and be happy with the job, okay, that's not even safe for the patient. So what we're trying to do here, and I believe that's what everyone is trying to achieve, is come to a situation where there is a sort of agreement between us nurses, the junior doctors, and also the government to feel like when you're going to work, you're safe.
Meanwhile, civil servants will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%. The PCS union's General Secretary describing it as insulting and completely inadequate. Staff are due to walk out in May and June across government departments and in areas like the Met Office. A mother and father have been found guilty of murdering their baby son on Christmas Day. Stephen Bowden and Shannon Marsden inflicted repeated acts of severe violence on their 10-month-old son, Finlay. 71 bruises and 57 fractures were found on his body. Finlay had only been placed back in their care for 39 days before he was killed, despite social workers asking for a longer transition period. A child safeguarding review has now been launched. Detective Inspector Paul Bullock said the injuries inflicted on Finlay were amongst the worst he's seen.
As a parent, you have no greater responsibility than to a child who is in your care. But Bowden and Marsden could not even bring themselves to take poor Finlay to hospital when it was totally clear that he was critically ill. They've never given a reasonable explanation as to why they did not do this, but it appears abundantly clear that their primary concern was their own freedom and not the life of Finlay.
2 serving Met police officers have been dismissed over discriminatory messages they sent to colleagues in a WhatsApp group, including some about Katie Price's disabled son, Harvey. A gross misconduct hearing also found another 6 former officers would have been dismissed without notice if they'd still been serving. Speaking on behalf of the force, Commander John Saville apologised to the Price family, saying he was repulsed and ashamed. Now, a student who threw eggs at the King has been found guilty of threatening behaviour. 23-year-old Patrick Thelwell threw at least 5 eggs at the monarch during a visit to York Minster in November last year. He'd pleaded not guilty, arguing he acted in self-defence against the violence carried out by the British state. The judge sentenced Thelwell to a 12-month community order with 100 hours of unpaid work to do. Meanwhile, the King has been speaking of the pride he has felt about his 2 sons as he observed military cadets at the Sandhurst Royal Military Academy this afternoon. It was the monarch's first visit to the parade as king, and during a speech he said, He stood as a father of 2 alumni of the Academy, mentioning the immense pride the princes would be feeling. The King also praised the UK's role as a leading nation in delivering training, equipment and advice to Ukraine. The US President Joe Biden has returned to his ancestral Irish roots, arriving in County Mayo. It's the final day of his 4-day trip to Ireland, which the former Taoiseach Enda Kenny said was the longest presidential visit ever to Ireland. President Biden is expected to make a private visit to the Mayo Roscommon Hospice that is dedicated to his son Beau, who died of brain cancer in 2015. Now, a European rocket is on its way to Jupiter, 4.1 billion miles away, to explore whether or not it supports life. It's going to take more than 8 years for the 6-ton spacecraft called JUICE to get there. It'll then spend around 3 years using instruments to investigate whether the planet's 3 moons can support life in its oceans in a £14 billion mission. If all goes well, JUICE should reach Jupiter by July 2031. You're with GB News, Britain's news channel. Now back to Patrick.
Lots to get through, but we start with the big news that I brought you a few moments ago from our video wall. Nurses will stage another round of strikes after members of the Royal College of Nursing rejected the government's pay offer. 54% of the RCN's members voted to reject an offer of a 5% pay rise this year and a cash payment for last year. So it wasn't actually that far off the old Brexit result, was it? But there we go. It comes after nurses who are members of another union, Unison, voted to accept a pay offer aimed at resolving the NHS dispute. I'm joined now by GB News' political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, this actually puts the RCN's chief in a very sticky situation because she recommended that they take this offer.
Yes, some splits emerging between the different unions and indeed within the unions now, because Pat Cullen, head of the RCN, is due to speak at 6 o'clock tonight. Now, previously, she recommended that members accepted this deal. And, of course, they've rejected it. 54% have rejected it on a turnout of 61%. And now she's written to Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, and is saying that this offer is simply not enough. The crisis in our health and care services cannot be addressed without significant action, etc., until there is a significantly improved offer. We're forced back to the picket line. But, of course, only a few short weeks ago, she had recommended that they accept the offer. And now these new strikes, 48 hours of strikes from 8 p.m. on April the 30th. And this time, and I think this is really worrying, there were exemptions in place previously for cancer care, emergency care, etc. Those will not apply, so nurses will be walking out in those areas.
I just wonder, though, look, I don't know if this is even possible to answer at this stage, but so 54% of a 61% turnout voted against this, bearing in mind another nursing union, Unison, voted to accept this pay offer. So they are in a minority, a massive minority of people here who voted to reject this pay offer. This strike, then, I mean, I would imagine, Catherine, I don't know, I would imagine that, 46% of people out of that just wouldn't turn up to it because they voted to accept the pay offer, no?
Well, we'll have to... I'm sure the maths will be broken down, but certainly in the case of Unison, this is a very different reaction, isn't it? Because Unison, 74% voted to accept. I think worth saying that Unison, they represent nurses, but they also represent other NHS workers and ambulance workers too. But the government are saying the decision by Unison, the largest NHS union, demonstrates that it is a fair and reasonable proposal that can bring this dispute to an end. So the fact that Unison has accepted it sort of strengthens the government's hand. Absolutely. But, yeah, difficult now for the RCN.
It is difficult for the RCN, completely. But, look, thank you very much for breaking that down. Great stuff. Catherine Forster, our political reporter. Now, on to some alarming figures out today that show excess deaths almost tripled after last month's junior doctor strike. So this is interesting, isn't it? We're talking about another nurses' strike. We're still in the middle of a junior doctor strike. The figures have just dropped, for want of a better phrase, when it comes to the amount of people who sadly died. Excess deaths during their last strike. So they walked out for 72 hours between the 13th and 15th of March, junior doctors. And over a 2-week period during and after the strike, the number of excess deaths in England shot up by nearly 170%. So there you go. The news comes on the day that the result of the ballot on the government's pay for nurses has just been announced. I'm joined now by Kelvin Mackenzie, who's the former editor of The Sun. Kelvin, look, I find this remarkable, really. Do you think that we should ban junior doctors from striking and be able to say to them we can do it because it's killing people?
Well, they always knew that it would kill people. They did accept that because, of course, they're the people that aren't going to die. And therefore, I think that we stop police officers because law and order is important. We stop the army from soldiers from striking because obviously the defence of the realm is important. Surely we must be able to say that doctors can't strike because people's health is important. And actually we now have the numbers which say that between the dates of March the 11th and March the 24th, the week of and the week after the strike, the number of people that died over a 5-year average during that period was 11% higher. Now, look, you can get stats to prove anything, but you've got to believe that there are if 47,000 doctors go on strike, there is a significant risk that people won't bother with the health service, or if you did get to the health service, you wouldn't be saved. So I honestly, I don't believe that the junior doctors can turn around and say, actually, nobody has died because of our actions. They knew it. They are taking our pain and our death as leverage against a pay rise. It's
Kelvin, what would you say?
Beyond shocking.
Well, just on that, look, what would you say to the people who'll be watching this now who say, well, what else do you expect them to do? It's the only way that they can make their voice heard, and if they want to see a good pay rise, then they've got to strike.
Okay, do you know, that is a very good point. First of all, you shouldn't go into the medical profession. Remember, they call themselves a profession. You should not go into the medical profession on the basis that we are, A, going to go on strike, and B, we know people are going to die, but our pay rise is more important. Okay, I actually believe the doctors should be paid more money. And I believe that one of the things that's holding them back is A, that they're unionised, and B, that this is a monopoly. We should be bringing in hospitals, we should be deconstructing the National Health Service, which clearly does not work. And look, there will be, they're there to make you feel better. In this particular case, they've discovered industrial disputes make you feel worse, and they don't care. So I do understand that they're entitled to more money. The way to get more money is to have competition come into the system so that it is not just the taxpayer that appears to be funding a system which cannot cope with the demands of today's health, today's old people, and the demands of a trade union, which has suddenly got massively militant, and they don't seem to care about their essential people, the customer, the patient. Why is that?
Kelvin, look, just quickly, because I'm going to talk to an actual junior doctor in a second, but I just want to get your views on the breaking news that happened just a few moments ago, which is that 54% of 61% of people who bothered to turn out for the Royal College of Nursing's vote have decided that they are going to go on strike now and reject the government's pay offer. So that's about the nurses.
The dispute's over. The dispute is over.
Right.
With Unison going back and with such a large percentage voting yes, then honestly, the government should and will, and I do congratulate them about this, sit tight, and you will watch this now begin to break down. There'll be some kind of small thing which makes it look like a fresh deal, but in the end of the day, the dispute is at an end.
OK. Well, Kelvin, thank you very much. As ever, Kelvin Mackenzie, the former editor of The Sun, reacting to those two stories. They're both health-related. Joining me now is Basha Mukherjee, who is a junior doctor and also, as well, a former Miss England winner. There you go, fantastic stuff. Thank you very much for joining me. What do you make of the junior doctors' strikes? Because I know we've been slightly overtaken by events with the nursing strike, but let's just keep it junior doctors related. When I woke up this morning and saw the figures about excess deaths from the previous strike, it actually made me quite angry. Have you been striking?
So I voted to strike, and as it happened, the last lot of strike days, I was on what we call 0 days. I had just finished night shifts, so you get a couple of days off as a result. So the decision at that time was not very hard for me not to turn up to work because I was already off.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that that would be a one-off, that we would strike and that would be enough. But clearly it wasn't. And now we're at the point where we've had to strike again. And I personally couldn't justify striking for 4 days for personal reasons, mainly financial reasons, financial constraints. I can't afford at this point in time to take 4 days off work. And that was the main reason for me not striking on this occasion.
OK. So, I mean, you're being really honest about that. It was a more of a money thing than a moral thing?
I would say so, yes, definitely.
Can I ask, do junior doctors take a Hippocratic Oath, or is this a bygone thing? What is it?
We actually don't take any such oath, but of course...
Is that a bit of a myth, is it?
Yes, I would say so, but nevertheless, we do have, 5 pillars that we stand by. One of the biggest one is non-maleficence. We don't want to cause harm. We want to do no harm. Beyond anything else of doing good or anything else, we want.
How is that compatible with strike action when we know that will have a big impact on patient health?
I want to just humanise doctors here, that we are as much humans as much as the other person doing their job, and we've seen multiple different industries and people striking in the last few months.
Yeah.
Train strikes, nursing strikes, etc.
You guys save lives, though. That's why it's a bit different,
But
isn't
it's
it?
a job, and we have to pay our bills also. And I'm sure you're aware, it's £14 per hour. It's not enough.
Is that true? Because I heard that was just the bottom, around 11% of junior doctors who don't do anything like overtime or work weekends. So this £14 an hour thing, that doesn't also include the pension payments and stuff, does it?
Yes, I do agree with that. However, it's the concept, really. I mean, junior doctors covers a large number of people who are basically not consultants. Nevertheless, I think my colleagues they've come to this point, and of course it's been a burden on our conscience also, knowing that it will impact patient care. But I can say that from my experience in the days that I've been working, and this week I've been working during the strike days, we've had actually more consultants on board and senior doctors. They're actually more experienced and actually cover the ground to cover for the strike days. And this has been for my workplace. I can't speak that for other places. But I know that the rota coordinators, they prepared in advance.
You see, I get that, and I really hope that's the case. I really hope that's the case. It's slightly difficult for me to accept that in a sense, because we've just seen the figures drop from the last time that there was a strike, and the excess deaths tripled. So I can't quite see how that line of, well, we're doing our best to make sure that there's no real holes in the schedule is working if more people are dying.
Should you really be asking that of junior doctors, or the people who are basically forcing us to strike and longer days, without hearing what we're trying to ask for? The whole point was to not strike and come back and strike again. We wanted the first strike to be working, and in fact the negotiations have been happening far before that. And it's because of being ignored and not being heard that we've been forced to strike.
Yeah, when I look at the average salary in the UK is £30,000 a year. Now, my understanding is that junior doctors can start on anything between around 29 and 34, and then within around 5 or 6 years, you could be on around 58,000, and then really you're away. A lot of people will go to universities to have student debt, will start in at a job that is on a lot less than that, and after 5 or 6 years not be in a position the same as medical professionals, with as good a financial earning capacity in the long run or as good a pension. Why should you guys get the right to strike?
Well, the very reason, because our job is something that is non-negotiable. I mean, it is a...
So we need doctors.
Absolutely.
See, it's like holding people to ransom a bit, is it?
Well, it isn't, but at the same time, if you respect and appreciate the role that junior doctors play in saving lives and saving the NHS, essentially, then you'd appreciate that we're not asking for something that's irrational, and actually it's fair, only because, yes, we're in university much longer than a lot of other courses. Yep. We're there for 6 years. We have other fees that we have to put in. For example, I'm a GP trainee. I've had to pay like over £500 this year just to be part of the RCGP, you know, the Royal College of GPs. So, you know, the costs all add up. And then you're adding up, you know, being a member of the BMA, various other costs, and we get taxed a lot as well. So it's not just a case of we're earning and it's just going all into our pockets.
All right.
So
Lovely. So I must say I've really enjoyed that. So thank you very much. And thank you for coming into the studio as well. Much appreciated. That is, of course, the wonderful Basha Mukherjee there, who is a junior doctor and also a former Miss England winner. Get your views coming in, of course, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm being told now that we have a bit of breaking news, do we? In the last few minutes, the government has reacted to the news that there will be more nurses' strikes. The government spokesperson said it is hugely disappointing that the Royal College of Nursing membership has rejected the pay deal recommended by their leadership. Following constructive discussions, all parties agreed this was a fair and generous offer, which is demonstrated by Unison, representing the largest share of the NHS workforce, choosing to accept it. The fact that the Royal College of Nursing has announced an escalation in strike action with no derogations based on a vote from the minority of the nursing workforce will be hugely concerning for patients. So it's difficult for me to even get that out, wasn't it? And I've got some more breaking news for you now. Emmanuel Macron has won his battle to increase the pension age from 62 to 64. There we go. Cue mass outrage in Paris, by the sounds of things. France's Constitutional Council has ruled in favour of the government's reforms. People are protesting in Paris right now, but I'm pleased to say that there's not been a repeat of the violence just yet of the last few weeks. I will be going there shortly to Paris, so there we go. Right, OK. We've all seen the riots in Paris previously, but it's not just the French who seem to be fed up with the system. I want to know what's gone wrong. Why are so many people fed up left, right and centre? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. This is Britain's News Channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Now, we've all seen the riots in Paris, but it's not just the French who seem to be fed up with the system. Just what has gone wrong, OK? That's what I'm desperate to know. I really want to understand this. Now, it's a landmark day, though. We're going to move on from that quickly, because it's a landmark day in the government's battle to solve the migrant crisis. It's the first anniversary of the UK's famous Rwanda deal, which was supposed to see thousands of migrants sent to the country. And, of course, since then, absolutely no asylum seekers have been put on a plane to Rwanda. Last June, a late intervention by the European Court for Human Rights blocked a flight carrying just a handful of migrants from taking off. Last month, Suella Braverman was in Rwanda, where she inspected accommodation that was supposed to be used to house the asylum seekers. But she actually said that she loved it so much she wanted the name for the interior designer, which is both, I think, a damning comment of Suella Braverman's taste and also quite a self-defeating move if you want to say it's a deterrent for people, but there we go. But for all of the tough talk from the government, the plan, just like the plan's meant to take the people to Rwanda, has not got off the ground. Let's just take a closer look at some of these details. And it is indeed exactly 1 year since Boris Johnson stood up in the Commons and said, well, we've got this deal with Rwanda. And as part of the agreement, the government said that it would send £120 million to the Rwandan authorities. So that's not cheap. Taxpayers' money and all that. And as I just said, 0 migrants have been flown out to Rwanda. To underline the scale of the crisis, a total of 45,755 people crossed the Channel on small boats last year. And, to give some more context, 3,793 people arrived in the UK on small boats during the first 3 months of 2023. It's worthwhile noting that the government's own preparations for the amount of arrivals in small boats this year tops the 85,000 mark, so nearly double what we had last year. New polling done by More in Common, the group More in Common, has found that almost double the number of voters support the Rwanda deportation policy than oppose it. So it's got support. The policy, the idea of putting people on a plane and flying that plane to Rwanda and dropping them there is popular. That's fine. People aren't that majority vote. But a majority do not believe that it will actually resolve the Channel migrant crisis. So the problem is people aren't morally opposed to planes taking off. They just don't think it's the right thing to solve the migrant crisis. And therefore, some would argue, pretty self-defeating. Joining me now to unpick these findings is a senior associate at More in Common. It's Conleth Burns. Conleth, thank you very, very much. Right, talk me through, if this is OK, exactly where the public are at when it comes to the Rwanda deal. Hit me.
Patrick, well, thanks very much for having me. So we've been tracking the public opinion on the small boats crisis and on channel crossings more generally since before Boris Johnson made this announcement a year ago today. And there's 3 things, basically, and you picked up on them in your intro there. The first thing is that fixing this crisis, stopping the boats, is important to the public. It's a top 5 issue. At the more recent poll this week, 20% of the public say it's a top issue facing the country. So generally speaking, the public want to stop the boats. And as you said, support is less than half. There is more people who support than oppose the Rwanda policy in the abstract, but that support is less than half, and it has been consistently the mid-40s for the last year. And then, as you rightly brought up there, most people don't think it's going to work. There's been a majority consistently over the past year who say that this Rwanda policy isn't actually going to do what it says on the tin. It's not going to stop the boats crossing the channel. And that's the big challenge that faces the government. Effectively, we've done polling and focus groups on this for the last year, and lots at that. And there are 2 things that the public want here. It's not that they're morally opposed to the Rwanda policy, as you said. 46% think it's a good idea, it's worth trying, because they think, for many of them anyway, that it might be a deterrent for some people. But they see that it hasn't worked over the past year, and so they're not completely wedded to the Rwanda policy. They don't want to just do the Rwanda policy for the sake of it. They want it to be to reduce the number of channel crossings here. But they want fundamentally control of our borders. They want us to be able to decide who comes into the country, how many come in, and when they come in. But they also want Britain to do its bit to stand up for those and welcome those who are in need. And so those are the two kind of control and compassion.
Exactly, yeah. Well, look, they don't want us to be, insert swear word here, right? And I think that's pretty straightforward. I think most people feel that way. But if you just logged onto Twitter or social media, you would be forgiven for thinking that we were a nation of open borders loons. But the reality is, when you do polling like this, realistically, people are broadly happy with us stopping the boats, want to stop the boats. They are morally comfortable with sending people to Rwanda. They are morally OK with that. Is that fair for me to say? They are morally OK with us deporting people to Rwanda, essentially.
So, in the abstract, they're not morally against deporting people to Rwanda. The challenge is about who is deported to Rwanda, and that's what we found in our polling this week. So, as the government's policy is at the minute, it's a blanket ban. Anyone who crosses the channel is not entitled to claim asylum here in the UK and will be deported either to Rwanda or back to their own country. What we find from the public is that actually there are some groups of people who they think should get a fair hearing in the UK. So children, in particular, they think that they shouldn't be disbarred from making an asylum claim in the UK or having their case heard. Women who are fleeing persecution, victims of modern slavery, and a series of other groups. And about half of the public think that they should be exempt from that. So, but they also think that economic migrants shouldn't be allowed to claim asylum in the UK, and so they should be entitled to go to Rwanda. And so you can see here that there's a kind of nuance to the public support on this. They're not opposed to Rwanda morally in the abstract, but it does matter who we're talking about here.
Yeah, look, exactly. And I think this is really reassuring stuff, actually, Colin. And I'm glad that you've come on to talk about it, because, look, I think as long as children aren't dragged kicking and screaming onto a plane, separated from their parents and sent to Africa, which I don't think anyone in their right minds wants, really, and if they do want that, they're probably not a particularly nice person. So, okay, as long as that's not happening and we aren't having border control and sending economic migrants on their way as a deterrent, then people seem all right with that, I think. So thank you very much, Colin Burns there, who is the Senior Associate at More in Common, who did some fantastic polling, really insightful stuff, actually, on this Rwanda scheme. And again, I wanted to highlight that because I do think that if people just see what happens in social media or see various different virtue signalling celebrities, you would be forgiven for thinking that you were in a minority of people out there who maybe just wanted some pretty basic things like tighter border control and a serious deterrent, planes taking off to Rwanda. And when the next time someone says to you, oh my gosh, you're a horrible person, you're a horrible person for wanting planes to go off to Rwanda, you can say, well, actually, I'm not. I am most people. There's loads more to come between now and 6 o'clock. I'm going to ask, is Labour the only party capable, hear me out on this, of reforming the NHS? But first, it is your latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. Nurses will stage another round of strikes after rejecting a pay offer from the government. Royal College of Nursing members voted against a 5% pay rise this year, as well as a cash payment for last year. The industrial action, running from the evening of April the 30th for 48 hours, will involve nurses in emergency departments, intensive care and cancer care for the first time. And it follows an earlier announcement by Unison that its NHS members had overwhelmingly voted to accept the same offer. In other news today, 2 serving Met Police officers have been dismissed over discriminatory messages they sent to colleagues in a WhatsApp group, including some about Katie Price's disabled son, Harvey. A gross misconduct hearing also found that another 6 former officers would have been dismissed without notice if they'd still been serving. Speaking on behalf of the force, Commander John Saville apologised to the Price family, saying he was repulsed and ashamed. And a mother and father have been found guilty of the murder of their baby son on Christmas Day. Stephen Bowden and Shannon Marsden inflicted repeated acts of severe violence on a 10-month-old baby boy called Finley. 71 bruises and 57 fractures were found on his body. Finlay had only been placed back in their care for 39 days before he was killed, despite social workers asking for a longer transition period. And the US president has returned to his Irish ancestral roots, arriving in County Mayo. It's the final day of his 4-day trip to Ireland, which the former Taoiseach Enda Kenny said was the longest presidential visit ever to the island. President Biden is expected to make a private visit to the Mayo Roscommon Hospice that was dedicated to his son Beau, who died of brain cancer in 2015. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
So, a quick snapshot for you then of today's markets. The pound buying you $1.2416 and €1.1304. The price of gold, if you fancy an ounce, is £1,000, 605.34. And the FTSE 100 closed today at 7,871.91.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News, investments that matter.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, we've all seen the violent protests in France, and many are questioning why there's been such a hostile reaction. Is it possible because people are fed up with the present system? It's worth reminding everybody of some breaking news that dropped just a few moments ago, which is that Emmanuel Macron has successfully managed, legally, to raise the pension age in France from 62 to 64. Nationwide strikes. It got a bit fruity yesterday. I imagine it might kick right off again this evening in Paris. We are monitoring the situation there closely. But whether it's the French sticking it to Macron, or farmers stepping up in the Netherlands, or the millions of disillusioned voters in Britain, everywhere you look, people think that the present system is failing them. But why? And what could possibly replace it? With me now is Benjamin Loughnane, who is a research fellow at the Bow Group. Benjamin, thank you very much. Now, the issue in France is not really just about the pension reforms, is it? It's about the general agenda, I think, of world leaders. And I look, for example, as Joe Biden being a good example of this right now. You know, doing whatever the heck he's doing, shuffling around the Republic of Ireland. There's massive problems in his own country. I know that there are state visits around, but is there a pushback to what is a perceived globalist agenda?
Yeah, I do think so. But in the case of Macron, it's not just about the pension. It's the fact that these reforms, which were quite controversial anyway, you know, you're turning around to people who've been planning for their retirement for many years. And then he's gone to these people and said, sorry, cancel your plans. You're going to have to work a few more years because I say so. But the way he went about it was extrajudicial. He didn't go through the parliament. He didn't do it democratically. There wasn't a proper debate or a vote. He invoked what is called Article 49.3 of the French Constitution, which effectively is designed to prevent a deadlock in Parliament. So if you have something like filibustering, where the opposition are deliberately preventing a bill from going through by tabling so many amendments that they'd never, ever get dealt with, and it would take forever to work with. So you have this as basically a last resort in the Constitution to get a bill through. He went straight to it. He didn't even try to have a debate or a discussion or a vote or listen to what people's concerns were. He acted, many would say, but many of these protesters would say, like a dictator or a king. And they didn't have a revolution and chop the head off their king so that someone could come along in the Republic and act like one.
Yeah, indeed. Is this something that you see now, national governments not acting necessarily in the national interest, prioritising global issues, so net zero climate change, prioritising being all cosy with various supranational bodies as opposed to maybe their own workers, when it comes to things as well like, you know, tax hikes to pay levies on a variety of different things that affect people nationally and international community as opposed to their own citizens who get to vote on them? Is this what people are getting up in arms about now? The idea that they are being led by an elite cabal of people who operate at a global level, not at a national level?
Yeah, so they go off to their international summits every year, whether it's places like COP or the G8 or the Davos or whatever it is, and they're given their marching orders. They agree on all of these things that they're going to do internationally in tandem with one another. But it becomes very difficult when you then go back to your country and try and get those laws through, and you find that the people of your country aren't actually too keen, and you do still live in a democracy and they can fight against it. And you can't move towards this sort of almost global movement towards certain policies when you have troublesome nations with people like the English or the French who really do push back against these things and say, hang on a minute, we don't really want to adopt a global idea. We would quite like to govern ourselves because we didn't fight so many wars and fight so many tyrants throughout history and constantly assert our right to liberty, to be told what we're going to do by some small cabal of international elites who decide our policies for us.
Benjamin, thank you very much. It's always strong stuff. Love to see it. Benjamin Loughnane there, who's a research fellow at the Bow Group. Right, OK, so with junior doctors about to end their 4-day stint on the picket lines, nurses poised to take their place. That was the breaking news again just a bit earlier on, that the Royal College of Nursing, 54% of a 61% turnout, so small minority really, have said that they are going to reject the pay offer, which was 5% pay offer plus a one-off lump sum cash payment. They rejected that, so they're going to be back out on strike on the 30th of April. This is on the same day that the Unison Nurses Union said that they were going to accept the pay offer. I was wondering, who can actually fix our NHS? Because it needs reform. It's not world-leading anymore. It's absolutely not. We've got epic record levels of waiting time. Clearly, the people who are in it don't feel like they're paid enough or valued enough. But can the Tories actually do it? Because it's Labour's sacred cow. To answer these important questions is Charlie Rowley, who's a former special advisor to Michael Gove. Charlie, will it have to be Labour who privatises the NHS?
No, nobody needs to privatise the NHS, but it does need, you're absolutely right, the reform. It needs better technology. It needs to bust the backlog, which is one of Rishi Sunak's 5 priorities. A backlog that was growing before COVID, it's fair to say, but it's been exacerbated by COVID. But what you do in order to beat that backlog is make sure that you've got a happy, healthy staff that are in the wards, that are dealing with those operations, minor or major, that need to take place.
Do that under a radically different system, like the one that a lot of these staff now who are happy to take a taxpayer-funded student loan to train how to become junior doctors, they then go and work in places like Australia and Canada under a system that rabid lefties would never let us implement over here.
Well, it's fair to say that the NHS needs reform because in an ageing population, in a growing population, it's inevitable that there are just going to be more people that need to use the NHS and are going to rely on it. So in order to get people in and out as quickly as possible, to get the medical care and attention that they need, you do need more doctors and nurses, you need more trained people to carry out that particular work. But you also need better technology. You also need to see a workforce that isn't going on strike. And the government, this Conservative government, as you rightly indicated, and as what we've heard today, has been able to negotiate with Unison, one union, and with the Royal College of Nursing. But it's the nurses that have voted against.
Sticking plaster politics. We're going to be here again in a year or so, aren't we? Because these people are not going to be happy with the exact nature of the offer that they've got. They still feel overworked and underpaid and undervalued. And I do have a limited amount of sympathy for that, must be said, but there is some nonetheless. And I just wonder whether or not it's going to take the Labour Party to stand up and go, here's some wholesale reform to the NHS, because if the Tories did it, they'd all think that you're evil.
Well, I think it has been a problem between the NHS and the Department of Health over a number of years. Let's not forget that the chief executive, the former chief executive of the NHS, Sir Simon Stevens, was a former Labour advisor to Tony Blair. So it's not a political, it's not a political football. I mean, I wouldn't want to weaponise the NHS, as Ed Miliband said in 2015. But it is about having a tough conversation with the public to say we need to be using our pharmacists more, a lot more as they do in Europe. Going to see your GP or presenting yourself at A&E should be a last port of call, not a first resort. We need to have...
I don't think there's a total mental block from people who work in the NHS on any suggestion a Conservative has?
Well, I think there is, for some strange reason, there does seem to be, I think, an idea that the NHS is in better hands with the Labour Party, but you can only have a fully functioning and funded NHS if you have a strong economy. And we know what happens with the economy if it's in Labour's hands.
Fair enough. Good stuff. Look, Charlie, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming into the studio. Really good stuff, that. Charlie Rowley there, who's a former special advisor to Michael Gove. Now, if you were worried that you might need 7 recycling bins outside your house, I have some very good news for you, people. I have some very good news for you. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Plans now for a new recycling strategy. I promise you this story is more interesting than it sounds. In England have been delayed until after the local elections. The government wants to provide 7 bins for every household. Now, they've delayed it, mainly because I think we can all agree that it's a bit nuts and a bit much, but here we go. Public health professor Dr. Miko Pancio joins me now. Thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. So, do you think that we should be doing more in this country to have things like 7 recycling bins outside of our house? I don't think the public will go for it.
It's a very bad idea. And the reason behind this is that it's impractical and there will never be compliance, a full compliance from the general public for this. And it's inefficient, and it's compared to mixed waste collection from just one bin. It's waste of money, and it exaggerates environmental problems for many reasons.
Why does it make environmental problems worse?
Because when you organize on-site collection from 7 bins, you need a lot of kilometers from heavy trucks to collect the garbage compared to a scheme when you only collect mixed waste. And this is only a small problem compared to this waste incineration scheme which is environmentally superior, because if you rely on this Scandinavian incineration strategy, you put waste directly into oven and produce electricity and heat. And this is much more efficient compared to collecting waste from several bins to produce, for example, energy, which needs energy to produce these energy inputs from different waste streams.
OK, Miko, thank you very much. Miko Pancio there, who's Public Health Professor, Dr. Miko Pancio. So thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Sorry, something's just tickled me there. But there we go. Right, OK, so I'm just going to delve into the inbox now. GBviews at GBnews.uk. Loads of people getting in touch about the recycling there. What absolute rubbish. I can't have 7 bins per household. I can't drive my car around that, says Charles. Maybe this is part of a bigger plan, Charles, to actually stop us all from driving everywhere and blocking the roads with it. Do you not think it's madness? Because the bins are going to be made out of plastic anyway. Probably. And then we're also going to end up having to see different delivery and collection services on every single day, continued trips to the tip. And you know what's really going to happen? You're going to end up with a load of people who either deliberately or more likely accidentally can't keep up with what goes in what bin and where. And so they put the wrong stuff in the bin and then you get fined, don't you? Or they don't take your rubbish out. So you have to make your own way to the tip. Can I just say as well, what does your kitchen look like? Because mine, I've got a bin, I've got a recycling bin. Don't really use it, to be honest, but I've got a bin and a recycling bin. If I then had to have a separate bin for green stuff, I then had to have a separate bin for tin, for glass, for metal, for whatever, your kitchen just becomes a dump, doesn't it? A very small series, almost like a bonsai dump of stuff. But there we go. I just don't see how on earth that's going to work. Lots of reaction as well, of course, to the new information that's come through about the Royal College of Nurses. They are going on strike, Royal College of Nursing, I should say, them going on strike from April the 30th. Kelvin McKenzie was on earlier. A lot of you actually are in agreement with him and just saying that, realistically, they have no leverage now in all of this. How on earth can they justify it when such a small percentage of the entire nursing community has actually voted to go on strike? With me now in the studio is Michelle Dewberry, who's coming up next with Jubes and Co. And I understand you're going to have a fantastic show lined up.
Oh, do you? Why? Who's been whispering in your ear?
Well, I've heard who's on.
Me?
The show.
Yeah, me.
Yours, yeah, but you got guests.
Oh, sorry, I thought your excitement. I thought your excitement was that you meant it was just me. But it's not, is it? You're talking about my new panellist and new face. Yeah, very exciting. I'm excited. Tom Watson.
Yes.
The former deputy leader, of course, of the Labour Party. He joins me tonight. Alongside him, the housewife's favourite businessman, Ben.
Sorry, I got a minute. Sorry. The who?
If he's listening, he won't like me calling him. I call him nicely the housewife's favourite because people love him.
Wow.
They want a calendar, I think, made up of him. If
Is
they
this
had
Ben
their
Habib?
way. Yes.
The Ben Habib calendar?
Yes, he'll be blushing now. I'm not sure if he appreciates me introducing him as this, because, of course, he's a very serious and successful businessman, former Brexit Party MEP, Reform candidate as well. So, yeah, I've got a great show coming up.
Fantastic, good stuff. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, I will be glued to it.
And I'll tell you as well what I've been thinking about since I last saw you. Very off-topic this is. But, ladies and gents at home, right, you need to see the size of Patrick Christys' satchel. I have never, in all of my life, encountered a man who carries a bag the size of your bag. And I have, ever since I cast eyes on it, I cannot help but wonder, what on air? Where is it? Is it here? It's not on the...
Is this happening? Am I awake?
If it was here, I would get up and I would lift it up and show the audience because it was mind-boggling. And I just wondered what on earth you had in it. And I've ruined it now because I don't think you've...
No, I haven't got my satchel with me. But it is nice to know, though. It is, I must say, nice to know that you have been admiring the size of my satchel.
I've been fantasising about what on earth's in it.
Right.
I have. Just what do you carry in it?
Well, you know, maybe... no, I can't say that. Right, thank you very much. That's Jubes there, Michelle Dewberry with Jubes and Co. And that will... OK, all right, enough about my massive satchel. So there we go. What a way to end the week. It is Friday, after all. Thank you very much, everybody who's been getting in touch and who's been corresponding with me over the course this week. It's been a big box office week of news, and it's not stopping anytime soon because Michelle Dewberry is coming your way now with Jubes and Co. Please get me off air.
Hello there, welcome to your weather update. I'm Claire Nazir. For the rest of Friday, it's showery outside. Feeling rather cool, temperatures are yet again depressed. Low pressure never too far away. This one towards the south is sliding down towards the Low Countries, but still producing some outbreaks of rain and other showery bursts just moving very slowly across the country. Winds across much of England and Wales, up towards Scotland and Northern Ireland, away from the far south, are fairly light. Now through this evening and overnight, this rain becomes confined to more eastern areas. Some heavy pulses towards the far southeast. Clearer skies further west, allowing for a frost, particularly across Scotland and Northern Ireland. A bit more breeze across Wales and the West Country, keeping temperatures slightly higher. And it will be a damp start to the day first thing on Saturday morning across the far south. This rain slides away very quickly. Elsewhere, it's a bright morning. It's a crisp one. Chilly outside, but at least, though, you'll see some sunshine. Now, through the day, improving across eastern counties, the cloud will break up and that will spark 1 or 2 showers as the sun gets to work through the afternoon. They could turn heavy across East Anglia. Brighter weather further west, drier conditions, blue sky before the cloud thickens from the far west later. Temperatures then typically around 15 or 16 Celsius, certainly a few degrees higher than the last few days. Now, through Saturday evening and overnight, cloud fades away towards the east, cloud thickens further west, and you can see some outbreaks of rain just clipping Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, perhaps the Isle of Man. Temperatures here will be slightly higher into Sunday morning, but a bit of a chilly start to the day further east. But you should see some brighter weather coming through. A legacy of cloud coming and going through the day on Sunday, so not as bright for most. And again, we'll see some damp conditions, particularly across the Western Highlands through the afternoon. Later on, though, the sun will come through across the far north of Scotland, far southeast of England. And here's your outlook through the next few days. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a